Most of my childhood was spent in the same 20 square miles of forest, somewhere in the Appalachian wilderness. I lived there with my mom in this cabin she claims to have built with her own two hands. I believed her for a while though now. I'm fairly certain she just found an abandoned cabin and fixed it up as best she could. It was so cold in the winter, and the small fires that we managed to produce in the fireplace did little to warm the area. Most winter nights were spent with us cuddled under the same blanket. During the summers, the cabin was so humid that you could see the wood sweating. Often, we would opt for sleeping outside on summer nights, despite the clouds of mosquitoes that the makeshift netting my mom made from old fabric did little to quell. The multitude of bug bites was preferable to waking up dehydrated from sweat though. Our days back then were mostly spent with my mom hunting for small animals to cook and eat, while I gathered firewood and picked berries. On rare occasions, we would take breaks and spend the day singing songs or reading from the handful of books that she had. However, we needed to survive, and that meant working hard to ensure that we had food and fresh water. My mask made foraging more difficult than it should have been. I constantly had to pull at the white cotton sheet to fit the eye holes over my eyes, and it would often become drenched in sweat within an hour. The only time that I ever took off my mask was when my mom bathed me. I would often try to catch my reflection in the water, but it was never clean enough. I wondered if she had ever seen my face. She would have had to seen it the day that I was born, right? I learned early on not to ask my mom questions that involved the masks or my face. The only answer I ever received was that if I took off my mask in front of someone, something bad would happen. If I pushed any further, she would say, "I'm your mother and you should trust that I know what's best." And I did for a long time. My mother was my whole world, and I loved her as much as a boy could. We spent most of our time together, and I have mostly happy memories of her. Of course, there are bad memories sprinkled in there, with some being downright horrible. I recall once when I was somewhere between 4 and 6, I was playing outside in our garden. Mom was on the other side of the yard doing laundry while I hopped through the soft dirt, stepping on any pests that I saw. Looking at their guts on the underside of my shoes every time that I stepped on one filled me with a sense of satisfaction, knowing that I was aiding in our survival in a small way. I had made my way to the end of the garden when I noticed the rabbit cage. Mom had kept several that she had caught in traps to breed for meat. She told me to not get attached to any of them as we would be eating them all at some point. But of course, I had given them all names and loved sticking my fingers in the cage to feel their soft fur. One of the females, whom I had named Daisy after a character in one of my mom's books, was staring at me, and she chewed on whatever vegetation she had in her mouth as I approached. She didn't scurry or hide like all the others in the cage, instead continuing to look me in the eyes. The curious way she watched me made me smile underneath my mask. We looked at each other for a while before I got the sudden urge to untie the twine from my neck. It fell to the ground and I slowly pulled the mask away from my face. Daisy continued staring as I moved my bare face closer to hers. A warmth fell over me as she stared. The feeling of having someone, even a small-minded creature like a rabbit, see my real face was almost euphoric. The rabbit didn't cower as I thought it might upon seeing my face. The way my mom pushed to keep my face hidden made me think that there was something horrible about it. But if there was, Daisy didn't care. She didn't look at me any differently than she might my mom or one of the other rabbits. It made me smile brighter than I ever had. "Nestor," called my mom from around the corner. I struggled to grab my mask from the ground and throw it back in my face, but it was too late. Mom grabbed me by the shoulder while staring at the sky and smacked the back of my head hard enough to make my vision blur. "Put your mask back on right now," she cried. I did as she asked, and she pulled me away from the scene, leaving Daisy still staring in the spot where I had been standing. We had Daisy for dinner that night. Mom didn't have to tell me, as I had seen her take Daisy from the cage from my bedroom window. I listened to her frantic squeaks before Mom likely broke her neck, as was her common method for killing our dinner. Daisy lay in a charred pile in the center of the table that night. Mom pulled off one of her legs and threw it on my plate. "Eat," she said. Tears soaked the inside of my mask as I pulled down the mouth hole a bit, so it sat as close to my mouth as I could get it. I picked up Daisy's leg and I brought it to my lips. "Eat," she yelled. I took a bite of the unseasoned meat and tore it away from the bone. I closed my eyes while chewing and swallowed. Mom nodded and began eating some breast meat, satisfied. "Do you realize what could have happened if I accidentally saw you without your mask?" she asked. "No, you won't tell me," I returned defiantly. Mom paused as if trying to gather her thoughts. She sighed and then gave her constant answer of, "Something bad." I felt my mask poking at the small holes that had begun to form along the neck. I would have a new one the first time I met another person. Like the last mask, this one was made from cloth, but it was a bit thicker, as if it were made from a thick jacket. Despite this, it breathed better, making the summer trips collecting berries a bit more bearable. I was 8 or 9 years old during one of these trips, and several yards from us, I spotted a bush covered in red berries. We avoided the green berries, and most of what we ate was dark purple and bitter. However, the red ones had a sweet, tangy flavor that I still crave sometimes. I rushed over to them, carrying my basket in tow. I hadn't gotten used to my long legs and arms from my growth spurt earlier that year, so I awkwardly flopped around before reaching the bush. As I approached, it moved a little, like something was inside. I moved closer, assuming that it was a squirrel or some other small critter that I could easily fight off. A mop of blonde hair poked out from the side of the bush. I rounded it to see the back of a kid. They turned as soon as I had approached, and I was met with a blue-eyed, skinny blonde girl. She was around my age. Her hair fell past her shoulders, and it was full of leaves. The dirt stains on her clothes and scratches across her bare legs told me that she had been in the woods for a while. "Hi," the girl said with a bright smile. I backed away a bit. "Why are you wearing a mask? Are you a superhero?" she asked with a mocking laugh. "Superhero?" I asked. "Yeah," she returned before reaching into her back pocket and pulling out a rolled comic book. She handed it to me and I saw Spider-Man written on the front. It was the first time that I had ever seen anyone else in a mask, though his was a lot cooler than mine. "You should wear one like him instead," the girl said. The sound of leaves crunching sounded behind me, and I saw my mom approach with her bow and arrow. Her eyes widened when she noticed the girl. "Hello," the girl said. I watched my mom's hands shake as she held the bow and arrow tightly against her side. Another sound came from behind the girl, and Mom quickly lifted the weapon. It was a man with a large brown beard. He spotted my mom and instantly threw his hands up in submission while slowly moving in front of the girl. "Who are you?" Mom asked. Hello," he said. "I'm Monty and this is my daughter Jamie. We're camping nearby. Sorry, I didn't know that we were on someone's property." Mom refused to lower the bow and arrow. "You need to leave." "Is this your property?" the man asked. Mom bit her lip and her arm started to shake. "Yes," she said. "Would the parks office confirm that if I called?" he asked. Mom lowered the bow a little. "Jamie, why don't you go find some firewood?" he said. "But Dad..." "Go." Jamie pursed her lips and glanced at me before stomping away. Look, if you're this deep in the woods, I assume you're hiding from something just like we are, he said to my mom before looking at me and raising his eyebrow. We don't want any trouble, and I don't care what you're doing out here, honestly. You see that tree? Mom said, pointing to the tallest one in the area. Don't cross it again. You or your girl. You got it, Monty said with a smile, and with that, my mom lowered her weapon. I was just bluffing, by the way. I ain't got a phone. It's too easy to track. Mom grabbed me by the arm and pulled as we started walking back home. If you ever want to trade some of your kills, let me know, he said. We've got plenty of beans and rice. Mom ignored him. We're in the RV down the trail about 2 miles, he called. I looked back and saw the girl waving. I didn't stop looking until they disappeared in the distance. I helped Mom gut the rabbit that she had caught for dinner, holding the bag for the innards as she ripped them out of the small creature. She hadn't said much since we met the father and daughter in the woods, and I couldn't tell if she was concerned or mad. I knew I should avoid bringing it up, but I couldn't help myself. I thought you said there was no one else in these woods, I said as she placed a handful of viscera into the bag. Oh, there weren't, she said, and I need to figure out a way to get rid of them. Why? I asked. They didn't seem dangerous. She paused. Everyone is dangerous, Nestor. I dropped my head and stared into the bag for a while, not meaning to. My eyes got lost in the red and pink mixture that slid with every slight movement. The image of the girl popped into my head and wouldn't seem to leave. You're thinking about her, aren't you? Mom asked. Over time, I've learned many moms have this ability to predict exactly what their child is thinking, or at least offer a good guess. She was around your age. I looked at my mom and then back into the bag. She dropped the rabbit onto the wood slab and knelt in front of me. I know you're lonely, but you know that it has to be this way, she said. But why? I asked. You never tell me. I tell you that you need to trust me, she said before standing back up. And that should be the only explanation you need. It wasn't, though. I don't know if it was the fact that my mind was changing in adolescence or that I had finally had enough, but I had already started thinking of ways that I could sneak away and meet that girl again. Oh, I know it'll make you feel better, Mom said before taking off her blood-stained gloves and going inside. She came back out a few minutes later, holding something behind her back. She stopped in front of me and my hand started to shake with excitement. I had never gotten a gift before and never expected one. The feeling of excitement was something that I hadn't had much experience with. She paused for a few more moments as I felt that I was about to burst. She finally revealed what looked like a light brown mass, the color of a dying tree. She smiled as she handed it to me. It felt smooth and almost sticky. I pulled the edges apart to see that it was a new mask, but it was nothing like the ones that I'd had before. This one had actual facial features, a mouth with lips, a nose like my mom's, and eyebrows. I made it with rabbit skins, she said. I thought you would like having one that looks like an actual face. I stared at it, trying to appear grateful but struggling to understand how I actually felt. Oh, well, try it on, she said. I did as she asked, pulling the thin leather across my head into my neck. It fit tightly against my head. The eye holes were perfectly situated so I wouldn't have to pull the mask down to see. You probably won't want to wear it in the summer, but I tried to make it more comfortable and durable than your last one. I breathed in the gamey smell of the leather and pressed my tongue against the inside of my mouth. Well, what do you think? She asked. Thanks, I said, wishing that it looked more like Spider-Man's. Mom was always exhausted after a day of hunting, especially during the summer. It was almost impossible to wake her up. When she fell asleep, I snuck out of the cabin and into the woods. I followed the path, remembering what Monty said about their RV being 2 miles down the trail. As I walked in the darkness, I wondered why I was trying so hard to see this girl again. I had been fine living my whole life without anyone besides Mom, though I had begun to wonder if that feeling of complacency came from a secluded life. I had been walking around for half an hour when I heard voices a few yards away. I ducked into the nearby trees and spotted a fire that gave way to a dingy brown RV. Monty sat in a chair beside the fire while Jamie danced around it. I moved closer without meaning to, not realizing that I was no longer hidden. Jamie spotted me as she rounded the fire. I watched her say something to him before she came skipping towards me. "Hey, Spider-Man, I like your new mask." "Thanks," I said. My name is Nestor." I like Spider-Man better. Come on, I told my dad that I was going to pee, but I want to show you something." She grabbed my hand and pulled me into the woods. Her hand was soft and warm despite it being chilly that night. I still remember that. The temperature of her hand left an impression on mine that seemed to remain for years. We walked a few yards more until she stopped at a small ditch with a thin stream at the bottom. She smiled at me before sliding down to the edge of the stream. I paused before following. At the bottom, she caught my arm and stopped me from going face first into the creek. She laughed and I laughed back. "Look," she said, pointing in the creek. I scanned the surface of the dark water, unsure of what she was pointing at. "Tadpoles," she said with excitement. I looked again, and in the moon's reflection, I saw tiny black dots swimming near the edge of the creek. "They'll grow legs soon," she said. "That's what I learned in school. Do you go to school?" I shook my head. "Yeah, I'm not right now, but my dad said I can go back soon, when we leave the woods." Despite not knowing her well, the thought of her leaving made my chest hurt. "Jamie!" cried Monty from somewhere in the woods. "I gotta go," she said softly. "Come visit me again. Just whistle 3 times and I'll come find you in the woods." She climbed up the ditch and waved before disappearing. I only went to visit her on the nights that my mom was exhausted. Sometimes Jamie was already in bed when I arrived. We only saw each other once every couple of weeks, but the times we saw each other made up for all the time away that I wanted to see her. Seeing her was like seeing sunshine after weeks of rain. On these late-night meetings, Jamie told me all about her life out of the woods, the friends she had back in her hometown, the restaurants that she missed, the afternoons she spent at their local library reading whichever book had the coolest cover. "Have you ever read The Boxcar Children?" she asked me one night. I shook my head. My mom had a small collection of books and most were too long for me to be interested in. The only 3 that I had read from her collection were ones about local wildlife and an old cookbook with faded letters. "Whenever I leave, you can visit me and I'll let you borrow it," she said while hitting tall blades of grass with a stick. "I have the whole collection. Oh, and we can go to the movies. I love going to the movies. I used to go all the time with my mom and dad before they broke up." "Broke up?" I asked. "Yeah, it's like when adults decide they don't like each other anymore, so they stop living together." She knew so much more than me about movies, books, the world, everything. "You've really lived out here your whole life, Spider-Man?" she asked. "Yeah, I think so," I said. "That's cool. You're like this guy in the movie called Tarzan, except you weren't raised by gorillas, right?" She laughed. We found a clearing and sat in the cool grass. Fireflies flew around the tall grass like embers. We looked at each other and she smiled and I smiled back. She picked at the grass to her side, randomly glancing at me. "Why do you wear a mask?" she asked, not looking up at me. I knew that it would come up eventually, though I liked how long she had gone before asking. My mom says something bad will happen, I said, wondering if I should have come up with a cooler reason. She picked at the grass for a few more seconds before standing up and dusting her hands. "Works for me," she said before offering her hand to help me up. And as we stood in the moonlight, I knew there was no way my face was nearly as nice as hers. We had met each other every few weeks for around a year without either of us getting caught, and I got the feeling that her dad wouldn't care as much as my mom would. One night when I came back, my mom was waiting in the yard staring into the woods. She spotted me and her eyes grew wide with anger. "Where the hell were you?" she cried, moving towards me like an angry bull. She grabbed me by the shoulders and tried to look in my eyes, but I refused to meet them. "Just out for a walk," I said. "You were meeting that girl, weren't you? You know we can't trust them." I pulled away from my mom and she stepped back, surprised. "What's wrong with you?" she asked. "She's my friend, my only friend." "I thought I was your friend," she returned, her voice dropping. I paused. "Friends don't keep secrets from each other. You don't tell me anything." Mom looked at the ground. I could see the thoughts racing through her head. She was considering something. "Why do we have to stay here?" I asked. "Why can't I have friends? Why can't I go to school? Why do I have to wear a mask?" Mom bit her lip and her eyes met mine. They were red and ready to break with tears. I waited for an answer, hoping that she'd finally decided to share something with me. She gripped her fists and then released them. She sighed and started back to the cabin, leaving me where I was standing. "Keep playing with her if you want," she said. "Just keep your mask on." Another year or so passed. I was still frustrated with my mom for not sharing more information with me, but I was happy that I didn't have to sneak out to meet Jamie. We even started meeting in the daylight, making it much easier to explore the woods together. I showed her all the things that I'd learned over the years, about how to identify poisonous plants, how to find your way home if you get lost, and how to track animals. "Wow, you know a lot about the woods," she said. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" I shrugged. "Will you teach me how to shoot a bow and arrow?" she asked. Mom had just taught me, so I wasn't sure how well I could teach her. However, the pleas in her eyes kept me from saying no. We found a spot near a clearing in the woods where my mom would often hunt for quails. We ducked behind a log and I set up the bow and arrow on top of it. A small flock of quail bobbed in and out of the tall grass. I picked a large one closer to us than the rest and I aimed the arrow just as Mom had taught me. The quail bobbed again and I took a deep breath before letting the arrow go. The flock flew into the air, leaving the arrow on the ground, pointed towards the sky. We walked to the clearing and found the quail struck through its chest with the arrow. "That was amazing," she cried. "I want to try." It was the first animal that I had ever killed on my own, and I loved that Jamie was here to see it. It made me realize that I wanted her there for all the big moments in my life. We went back to the log with my quail and hid. An hour or so passed before the flock returned and started picking at seeds and insects on the ground. I handed Jamie the bow and arrow. "What do I do?" she asked, holding the bow and arrow at her sides. "Oh, you have to show me, silly." I awkwardly moved towards her and placed my arms around her shoulders. I lifted her arm with the arrow and then the one with the bow. I positioned them in the right spots, slowly. Her hair smelled like sweat and dirt, but I liked it. You have to aim and take a breath before shooting," I said. "You need to make sure you're completely relaxing and taking a breath helps." "Okay," she said. "How far do I pull the string back?" I gulped before putting my hand over hers. She breathed quickly as if I scared her, but quickly settled into my arms. I cupped my hand around hers and pulled the string back. She looked at me and smiled. "I think I got it," she said. I moved away as I noticed my heart beating harder than it ever had. She aimed the arrow and took a breath. She let it go and the flock flew away. We both watched the arrow for a moment and saw it move. We ran to it and saw the quail shot on the side. I pulled the arrow out and the tiny bird struggled to move away from us. "Oh no," she said. I could see her starting to cry. "It's okay," I said, picking up the quail and holding it between us. "Do you think that we can help?" Before she could finish her thought, I twisted the bird's neck and it went limp. I held it up and she stared at me wide-eyed. I cocked my head at her, but she looked away. "It's okay, you can keep it," she said. We spent the rest of that day at a clearing close to her campsite. She poked at rocks with her pocket knife and stared at the forest, not saying anything. I was about to ask her what was wrong when she dropped her head and began sobbing. "What's wrong?" I asked. She looked back up and then to me. "I want to go home." I dropped my head. "I know my dad is hiding me from my mom. He picked me up from school one day and told me that we were going on a fun trip and that we would go home soon. I believed him for a long time, but I'm not a stupid kid anymore. I miss my mom, I miss my old friends." I know she didn't mean to make me feel bad, but hearing all this hurt. I thought she was happy out here with me and that all we needed was each other. "I want to leave," she said, "and I want you to go with me." I sat back. "What? I can't leave." She pursed her lips and set her head on her knees. "Why do you wear that mask?" "I have to." "Well, because your mom says." I paused and then nodded. "Your mom's lying just like my dad is. I bet you $1 million that nothing will happen if you take off your mask right now." She moved her hand towards me and gripped the neck of the mask. I pulled back and she let go. She paused and tried again, and this time I allowed her to untie the twine. Everything seemed to move in slow motion as she gently pulled upwards on the mask, careful to avoid yanking too hard around my nose and eyes. Everything went black as the last bit of the mask traveled up my face, but then Jamie's smiling face greeted me with the sun behind it. We stared at each other for several moments. "You see, nothing," she said, "and you don't even have any hideous scars or anything." "Really?" I asked. She shook her head and then leaned in, kissing me on the lips. My eyes widened in surprise for a moment, but I quickly relaxed as it felt right. Perfect. She pulled away and smiled again. My smile was so big that my cheeks started to hurt. "Let's leave, tonight," she said. "Tonight?" She nodded. "I can grab food and stuff to last us a while, and you can use your forest knowledge to lead us back to the road. Some adults will have to pick up some kids they see on the side of the road. I'll tell them where my mom lives and we can go back there." "Your mom would let me stay?" I asked. She nodded. "Well, of course." She stood up and offered her hand to me. I took it and pulled myself up. "Meet me here when the moon is in the center of the sky," she said. 1,000 thoughts went through my mind as I stood there, holding Jamie's hand. I wondered if this was really a good idea, if my mom would be okay without me, if I was ready to leave the woods. But I knew that I could do all of it as long as I was with Jamie. I nodded. She started out of the clearing with me a few feet behind her. She paused, causing me to stop. She stood still for several seconds with her arms at her sides, the pocket knife in her hand shaking. "Jamie, are you okay?" She turned to me with wide eyes and her mouth clenched. "Jamie." I moved towards her, but she lifted the knife. I stood frozen as she moved it towards her head, holding it a few inches from her cheek. "Jay." She stuck the knife deep in her face and I screamed. She pulled against the handle, dragging the blade along her face. I ran to stop her, but a kick to my stomach sent me to the ground. Jamie continued cutting her face, dragging it along her forehead and down to her ears. I leapt up to stop her again, but again and again she managed to keep me away while continuing to slice her flesh. "Jamie!" cried a voice from the woods. Monty distracted me for a moment as he came running into the clearing from behind me. "I heard a scream," he said while approaching, and noticed the knife in Jamie's hand and the blood running down her neck. "Jamie!" he cried. He ran quickly towards her, glancing at me along the way. He paused a few feet behind me, and I stood between the two of them as the horrible sounds of Jamie's knife still working down her face filled my ears and made my legs immobile. Monty stared blank-faced at me for a moment, and then dug into his pocket without looking down. He pulled out a much larger knife than Jamie's and stuck it into his own cheek, starting to cut along the same pattern that she had. I clocked the silence from behind me and turned. I didn't want to see what Jamie had done, but I couldn't stop myself. My brain wanted to leave as quickly as I could, but something buried deep told me to look. I looked upon a bloody mess of musculature. Her eyelids were still there, though she didn't blink. Her nose was gone, as were her lips, revealing 2 rows of small teeth. The sounds of Monty continuing to slice sounded behind me as my eyes traveled down Jamie's body. At her side, I saw what was left of her face. She lifted her arm and held it up to me. It looked like I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. Instead, I ran as fast as I could back to the cabin, pulling my mask back over my face along the way. Mom was peeling the husks from some corn when I ran into the yard. I stumbled to the ground and she ran over. The inside of my mask was soaked with tears and I was having trouble breathing it in. "Nestor, what's wrong?" she asked, kneeling in front of me. Her fingers drifted to the untied twine at the bottom of my neck. "Oh no," she said. Did she see your face?" "They're still alive. We can take them out of the woods." "It's too late for them, son. I'm sorry." I cried violently for another few moments and then looked at my mom. "When you said something bad would happen if somebody saw my face, you didn't mean something bad would happen to me, did you?" I sat in the kitchen while Mom brought me a cool glass of water. I could tell that she was stalling, but I didn't care. Everything was wrong and nothing she said would make it better. She sat in front of me and grabbed my hand. "I didn't want to tell you. I hoped I would never have to." She looked from side to side and then at me. "In the town I grew up in, this small place on the other side of the woods, there were stories of things in the forest. Things that only showed themselves when they wanted to be seen. Spirits, ghosts, monsters. Natives had a name for this particular brand of spirits that I can't remember," she continued. "Us in town always just called them face stealers." My heart stopped beating for a moment. The folks said if you looked at their faces, they would take yours. All of us kids figured they were just stories meant to keep us from wandering too far into the woods. That's what adults do, right? Tell kids fibs to keep them from getting hurt. Well, that's what I learned to do, Nestor, and I'm wondering if it was right. I'm wondering if I should have just told you this stuff from the beginning." She sighed. I wanted to say something, but my mind couldn't find the words. "I spent most of my life believing that there was no such thing as magic and things were only the way that you saw them," Mom said before pausing and looking at me. "One day I was walking in the woods just trying to clear my head. I might have wandered farther than I should have, but I grew up around the trees. I knew how to find my way back. As I was fixing to turn around, I noticed a man a few yards away from me off the trail. I didn't think nothing of it at first, figured that he was out hunting or something like that. But when he turned to me, his face was missing, cut clean off, took everything except his teeth and ears. My hand started to shake. I didn't want to believe anything she was saying, but the image of Jamie's skinless face refused to leave my head. I started walking backwards thinking this man must have lost his mind, but it started to occur to me that maybe all those stories I thought were bullshit actually had some truth to them. She looked at me and then away. It was the first time that I had ever heard her curse. I kept moving away from the man when I saw this small body facing away from me, a few yards away off the trail. A kid, no older than 2 or 3, completely naked in the woods by themselves. I walked towards them thinking that they might be in danger from the man, but then I saw it. A clump of skin on the ground in a pile like some messed up anthill. The holes for his eyes were the only thing I saw before turning away. I didn't know what to do. I thought about just leaving you out there, but then you started to cry. A painful cry that broke my heart. I couldn't have kids of my own, but she swallowed her saliva. I wrapped my outside shirt over your head and I picked you up. And when you wrapped your tiny arms around my neck, I knew that I had to protect you. So I just kept walking deeper and deeper into the woods, not knowing what to do but hoping that I would figure it out along the way. She answered the first question that I had without me having to say anything. I don't know who left you there or why, she said. I wondered if your real parents would ever come looking for you. And maybe that's partly why I wanted us to stay as hidden as we could. Her eyes drifted to me. There was a long, heavy silence. Nestor, she started. I don't want to ask, son, but I think that I have to. When your friend did what she did you like it? Of course I didn't like it, I thought as I wandered back through the woods. I didn't have time to examine my emotions at the moment though. I thought that I was terrified, but had I confused excitement for terror? The sun was beginning to set when I made it to the spot where Jamie and Monty lay. They were both on their backs and their bodies still against the bright green grass. I warily approached, not wanting to see what had become of their faces, but unable to stop myself. I stopped just shy of their bodies and noticed something on the ground. A small mound of pink flesh stared back at me, and I knew that it was her face. I didn't move for a few moments, my stomach turning at the idea of what her face might look like detached from her body. But still I moved towards it, seeing a few insects had begun picking away at the flesh. I picked it up and dusting the small creatures away while feeling the softness of the flesh between my fingers. As the stinky blood coated my palms, I felt the side of my mouth begin to curl into a smile. I gasped and dropped Jamie's face before running away from the scene, wiping the blood from my hands onto my pants. I sat in my room staring at the wall for a long time. My body still buzzed from the feeling of Jamie's face between my fingers. The fear and sickness had all disappeared, instead replaced with an elation that I had never experienced. My body felt light and the constant fear and anxiety that usually filled my brain had gone away. I felt confident and more intelligent, though it seemed impossible at the time. I sat with the feeling, not wanting it to leave. However, when it did, I felt worse than I ever had. A dark cloud seemed to surround my head as my body felt heavy and bound to the space around me. The realization that I would never see my best friend again came rushing into me, and the guilt of knowing that I had caused her death made me wish that I were the one lying lifeless in the grass instead of her. I cried for the next few hours until it felt like I had no tears left. My mom had come by to check on me several times but avoided coming into my room. "Just let me know if you need something, okay?" she had asked once. I heard her move to her room and shut the door. She never closed her room at night before that day. I could tell there was something different about her, and it had become more evident over the next few days. She no longer walked around the house like an authority figure, but more like someone trying to avoid eye contact with a mean dog. She never brought up the incident again, and I was thankful for that. The guilt of killing Jamie never went away, though neither did the remembrance of that ecstasy that I experienced afterwards. It created a temptation in me to go out and find someone else to whom I could show my face. It became a regular craving. Usually it was more like one might crave sugar after going a long time without any, but some nights it was almost comparable to starvation. It became so bad that one day I saw my mom working outside, busy and distracted with chores. I approached from behind and started removing my mask without thinking. My mom heard me approach and spun around, dropping the garden hoe that she had been using. The look of fear in her face, the woman who had ensured my survival, who had loved me despite knowing that I was a monster, seeing her that terrified of me, it almost hurt worse than Jamie. Mom slept with a chair against her door that night and for most nights after. While she was sleeping one night, I snuck into her craft room, spotting a large needle that she used on leather. I grabbed it, taking a thick roll of twine as well. Jamie's face flashed in my mind. First, her face the first time that I had met her, followed by the last time. I knew it was horrible, but my emotions and my brain weren't matching, and at the time I felt like my brain was right. If the cravings weren't going to stop, then I needed to prevent my mask from ever coming off again. I took the needle and twine and held them to my neck for a moment before taking a deep breath. The needle punctured my skin, and then the mask leather. I cringed as the twine slid down my flesh and felt every centimeter of its rough edges scraping the inside of my skin. Lines of crimson fell from every puncture in my neck. The harsh stinging I had felt when I first punctured my skin had become a dull pain. For the first time in my life, the mask felt warm and comforting. I breathed in its leathery smell before lying back on my bed, thankful that I would never hurt anyone like I'd hurt Jamie. My bed is much more comfortable these days. I invested in a weighted blanket and a goose down pillow, and you can truly tell the difference. In a month, it'll be 10 years since I left the woods. Mom died a year prior, and being out there by myself, well, it was lonelier than I can describe though. On some nights, I would give a lot of money for the peace and quiet of the woods. My apartment overlooks a bustling downtown area, and while the view is amazing, the noise of the city can be a bit overwhelming at times. Thank God for the noise-canceling headphones that my ex-girlfriend gifted me for Christmas last year. Though it's my day off, I decided to do some cleaning. I never got around to hiring a new cleaner, and the place has become a bit of a sty. I go to the bathroom and look in the mirror for a moment, seeing my night mask staring back at me. It's more lucid than any of the masks that I had growing up, but thick enough to prevent me from seeing my actual face. This mask is milky white and made of a thin plastic. It only covers my face, leaving my hair, ears, and neck visible. The scars where I had sewn that old mask on became a pale white over the years. No one ever asked about them though. There were only a few people who had ever seen me with my shirt off. Lining the bathroom counter are several other masks, ones that I made myself from materials that I've collected over the years. I've been perfecting them since leaving the woods. I was able to get away with crude masks for a while, using the excuse of having bad scarring, but I realized how much better it was to get close to someone before doing what I had to do. And people want something that they can see, eyes that react to them, lips that move, and cheeks that wrinkle when smiling. I think I've almost got my masks perfect. They contour to every crease of my face and match my skin color perfectly. Only sometimes will someone notice something off about my face. Maybe they spot a plasticky sheen to the synthetic skin, or see makeup lines around my lips or eyes. They only make a look of concern and continue about their day, wondering if what they saw was only their imagination. I decide to clean my room first, starting with the mess of clothes in the closet. Before getting started though, I decide to reminisce and drag out the leather box near the back corner of the closet. I place it on my bed and pull the flap open. A smile climbs up my cheeks. I've managed to preserve most of them, with the latest ones being those of my ex-girlfriend and the cleaners. There are 23 in total, but I have plans for several more, so I'm probably going to need to find a better storage system. Seeing all the empty eye sockets and jagged edges of the faces always makes me feel a slight amount of the elation I felt upon taking them. It also makes me sad though. Sad that I didn't go back for her face before the forest took it. Being in the dark never really bothered me, not until I came here. The reason I really kind of enjoyed the shadows is because of my family. My uncle owned this fine bed and breakfast near southern Salem, the biggest house around the area back when it was built, and told guests that one of the most exciting features would be annual ghost hunts that he and my Aunt Riley hosted. They would deliberately cut off the electricity for everyone that stayed in the house that particular night, and then pretend that the darkness was the result of spectral forces coming to pay a visit. When all was said and done the next day, the fooled guests paid extra tips and spread the gossip about the blackout to others, and my uncle died a wealthy man thanks to their superstitious beliefs. I stayed there so many summers when Mom had to work that these silhouettes on the walls were probably my closest friends. For the past week, a deep-sea research facility near the Kenneth Trench has gone dark, and it's made me think a lot about my uncle and how I wish that the station down below was just pulling a prank to gain publicity. One day of radio silence would have been ordinary, but an entire week spelled trouble. This time, the dark was not inviting at all. It felt like an enemy, and we were preparing for a battle that we didn't understand. Matthew Sincall, our commanding officer for the reconnaissance mission, said that our bosses weren't sending us here to find survivors, and that all of us needed to be prepared for what lay ahead in the trench. This entire station and what they research is above my pay grade, but I'm sure whatever's down there won't be pretty, he said over a drink as we passed 10,000 meters. It would be almost 3 more hours before we reached the bottom, but due to pressurization concerns, we had paused near an underwater ventilation pocket. The others all seemed calm. Most of them were busy just shooting the shit or speculating about what we might find. I heard someone tell me that this is a one-man operation, a 6-month stay in a small hellhole with no one to talk to but the walls. If that were me, I'd go crazy and probably off myself. Our navigator, Cal, commented as he made the gesture to pretend that he was hanging by a noose. Dude, that isn't funny, Richard snapped as he lit up a cigarette. He was the only one that seemed to be on edge. Maybe because his position of being the chief engineer meant a lot of heavy tasks for him. Our employer wasn't really concerned with what had happened, just that we needed to get operations up and running again. Cutting corners is nothing new. It was likely some type of accident and they couldn't react in time to handle it, so we'll be on cleanup duty. Our only female member of the team, Bella, said as she worked on a doodle. It reminded me of a flower or something. But there was nothing in the report from the computer about structural damage. I told our marine biologist, just as the last member of the crew, the geophysicist, Johan, pushed past me to grab the cigarette from Richard's lips and then tossed it on the floor. Bells just likes to see men's guts, and Richie here's an anxious mess already, so all this chit-chat is just gonna have him even more distracted than usual. He barked as he glared at all of us as though he were second in command. "Oh, Johann, don't be snooty just because I don't want to screw you," she chirped back as she grabbed her notebook and left the mess hall. The others did the same, leaving our Dutch expert to only glare at me. "Everyone should focus on their job here. That includes you, Rent-A-Cop," he sneered. I didn't bother asking why he was being so aggressive as the sub began to dive again, instead opting to follow Richard down to the robotics deployment room and see how he was faring with our gear. To go this deep, we needed the best equipment possible so the pressure wouldn't crush us, and the heavy mech suits that Aspheria Energy had supplied were top of the line. Or that's what I was told anyway. Richard's anxious checking and rechecking of all the safety gear and operational systems did make me nervous as well, but he just reiterated that it was better to be safe than sorry. He jumped a bit when I came down the ladder and shook his head, muttering something. "Thought you were that asshole again. You know, just because his government has ties to our board, it doesn't mean that he gets to piss on us," he remarked. "Well, seeing as none of us stood up to him, I kinda think that it does mean he can do just that," I remarked, sliding my hands into my pockets and asking him what he was working on now. "Oh, final checks on the communications and long-range sensors. You'll be going out there blind and dark if I don't," he explained. "And the dark isn't so bad," I commented. He gave me a funny look. "This isn't just your average, ordinary darkness. We're talking pitch black, absolute zero. You wouldn't be able to see even your own nose on your face. One wrong misstep in this Goliath without lights, and you'll fall in a hole or something and be dead long before we can even hear you scream." I smiled uncomfortably. "Great, so now the comms will work just fine for you to listen as I die." "Something like that," he said as he returned back to work. I glanced back up at the ladder, reflecting on the gossip from the mess hall. "So, who do you think is right?" "About what we'll find?" Richard asked as he wiped a sweat off his brow and said, "I hope none of them are. I knew the guy down here. He had a family just like all of us. The mission statement said this was a reconnaissance. Let's keep it that way." I wanted to ask him more about his affiliation with the station operator, but an alert above our heads told all officers to report to the bridge, so I put the conversation on hold. Up top, Cal and Commander Sincall were already there scanning the area directly in front of us. There was something out there according to radar, and our commander explained quickly that whatever it was moving. This far down, it's not abnormal to find sea life of all kinds, really. Amoebas, vampire squid, and even some siphonophores have been found at depths of 3,000 meters. Bella commented as she arrived. "Well, I don't think I've ever seen something quite this big before," Cal said, letting her look at what the data suggested. The readout showed an organism that had to be at least 500 meters, perhaps 700 because some of the data was inclusive. But it was moving amid the trench as though it didn't worry about its size at all, fluidly and without hesitation toward us. There's gotta be a mistake of some kind. Nothing that large could possibly be at these depths, I told all of them. Sometimes it's there right up against the walls, and then the radar shows nothing. Maybe it's volcanic activity of some kind. And Duran did mention that there was a pocket close to the lower portion of this dip here. Matthew paused and showed us all the charts before adding. The president also said that this area was too close to the mantle, and our sub couldn't handle the heat. Maybe we are just getting some readings from that. Only way to find out is to suit up, Johann said, jabbing at Richard. Hold on, whatever's causing all of this seismic change in the trench isn't part of our mission. So let's focus on the substation, shall we? Cal suggested. But if it's alive, maybe that's what went wrong. An attack, Bella asked. Outside our own vessel, we felt more force, like a gale wind pushing against us at Mach 1. I mean, that doesn't feel like it was just a volcanic rumble. Our commander made the call, agreeing with his navigator to stay on course to the substation. We'll be there in less than an hour. If all goes well, we can be out in under 10 minutes. So let's cease the idle speculation and get this job done, And that got us all to work, our vessel slowing in speed as we went westward and followed the pipeline. I kept my eyes out toward the trench walls as our massive beams illuminated the empty rocks. They were mesmerizing, a prismatic display of crystals and colors that seemed to rival any beauty that I had ever seen on the surface. They were also moving, like vines against a tree trunk, slithering and sliding about every time the rumbling occurred. And if I didn't know any better, I could swear that I heard something out there in the dark. Not the roar and not just the water and earth moving as we pushed our way in. Something beneath all of that. A very faint whisper. I'm not sure why, but I found the sound enticing. Approximately 4 minutes later, those same bright lights showcased the eastern side of the substation, which in contrast to the iridescent trench walls was a dull green and gray, like an old toy stuck under a bed somewhere that was forgotten. The place definitely looked abandoned, but our next scans confirmed there was absolutely no structural damage to be found. The systems also appear to still be alive, Cal said as he placed his right hand on the back of his neck. Kinda weird, but I just got a chill under my skin. Oh, considering the fact that we're closer to hell than anyone alive, I'm surprised you just now joined Richie on the stress train. Johann laughed. Richard gave him a cold stare. Can you for 1 second stop being a giant prick? Again, Johann laughed. Well, at least I'm a real man and I have something between my legs. Bella stopped dead in her tracks as she entered last. She whipped around and shot back. Oh, good point. Do you want to whip it out so that I can suck you off because you're acting like you haven't gotten laid since last century? I suppressed a chuckle as Johann's eyes blazed with anger and it looked like he might just throttle her to the floor. Enough, all of you. Matthew shouted so loud that everybody froze. He was focused on the comms and turned up the volume. I'm picking up a signal. At first, it sounded like static, but then as it got louder, it reminded me of chattering, like the whisper that I had heard before, and some kind of computerized beeping at the end before the weird noise had returned. Is that Morse code? I asked as I tried to listen closer. I had taken a class in naval training like the rest of us, but I was rusty. I think the beeping at the end is, but the rest of that sounds like, I don't know, insects, Cal muttered. Maybe it's just standard SOS, I asked. Well, if so, then why did HQ say they've gone dark? Richard wondered aloud. I think I know why. Because this broadcast, it's not going anywhere. Cal commented as he ran it through our system for translation. Nothing was coming up. What do you mean? I mean that it's on a loop for anybody inside the station, he responded. Well, why would they do that? Bella said as she looked toward the station. It still looked as dead as we had seen it a few moments ago. No, we can ask them once we board, our commander remarked as he walked toward the window and gave the order to take us to the depressurization seal on the station. Our vessel slowly settled to the top of the facility, the two meeting and making a grinding noise as it hit the seal, and then our tools reached and began to ensure that we were secure to the station. The entire ocean seemed to go silent as we turned off engines. Our Dutch geophysicist gave a nod of approval and crossed his arms. Well, who wants to go in and knock and see if anyone's home? Matthew gave him a smirk. Oh, thank you for volunteering, Officer Blaine. You and Elder can cross over. Bella, I want you to work alongside Richard to make a list of samples we'll be gathering using the Mac. Cal, I need you to see if you can establish communication with the surface. And what will you be doing, O illustrious leader? Johann growled, clearly not happy with being paired with me. Supervising, Matthew responded, matching his tone. Is that a problem, Officer Blaine? Unsurprisingly, his response was to back down, and Johann muttered for me to gear up and meet at the seal. I gave Richard an apologetic shrug and commented, I hope your buddy is okay in there. He didn't respond, already focusing on the terrain around us alongside Bella, so I found my authorized weapon and marched off the bridge as well. Johann was in a hazmat suit already when I got there, singing a Dutch tune before asking, How do you think we can get inside? It's not like they're just gonna roll out the red carpet. Well, not if they're dead. A brilliant deduction, I said, growing tired of his asinine attitude, as we moved to where our ship met the station. The commander said that our vessel comes equipped with a strong pressure mechanism here at the locking point. I figure that we'll push the door open with the equivalent force of 3 elephants. Easy peasy. I was just about to place the command into the wall display when we heard a loud noise from within the station, and the seal itself opened on its own. As the massive steel door slid between our connecting tunnel, there was a fizzing noise coming from the lock itself. I knew that meant leveling of our oxygen to match what was inside, but I was more focused on the other sound that I heard once it had come to a stop. The strange chittering and noise that Cal said was playing in a loop, and was clearly being broadcasted on a PA system of some kind, because it filled the room as we stepped through. Neither Johann or I said a word as we started to explore the substation, an atmosphere of loneliness and dread enveloping us. The next room had a mech suit almost identical to the one that Richard had been working on in our sub, except this one had corrosion damage of some kind in the left arm, perhaps due to a malfunction of some kind during a pipe repair. The blowtorch nozzle looked torn off, thus preventing the suit from being useful for pipeline repairs. Instinctively, I held onto my firearm and led the way down the tunnel, searching for the source of the bizarre chattering. Finally, we reached what we both could tell was the command center filled with computer monitors, systems and lights all working perfectly well. And in the center of it all was the same noise coming from the master computer. The beeping at the end of the loop was clearer now, and as I was even more certain that it had to be Morse code of some kind, which told me that the computer was likely only running on limited power to send out the message and nothing more. Sitting down, I managed to turn off the broadcast within only a few keystrokes. Thank goodness for that, Johann said, rubbing his forehead. That incessant grinding was giving me a headache. I was about to make a quick jab at him about that when a new voice caught our attention from the doorway. Hister, how many times do I have to remind you that I'm the one that picks the playlist and I will change it when I'm good? And the man froze, a toothbrush in his mouth and his hand holding up a towel against his drenched wet body. Hello. He covered himself a bit better as he fumbled out words. Sorry, I wasn't exactly expecting company. I mean, besides the usual hallucinations. You're not hallucinations, are you? Johann and I exchanged a weird silent look between us that told me he agreed this guy definitely had a few screws loose. I'm Officer Elder Gilman, and this is Johann Blaine. We're with Aspheria, and we're so glad to see that you're alive. He finished cleaning himself, running the towel through his hair rapidly and talking at the same time. I don't see why I wouldn't be. I mean, if you consider being down here for the past 6 or 7 months, losing my ever-loving mind, looking at walls to be living. Joseph Eckley, operations for Substation 46. We haven't received any data from you for the past 2 weeks. Needless to say, we assume the worst. Johann told him as Joseph stepped into a side chamber and shouted that he would be out in a minute, Oh, sounds to me like somebody got their wires crossed. Unless, of course, there's a problem with my computer after all. I don't really get any messages from the surface either. Never have. But I chalk that up to being part of the gig and not a malfunction. When he returned, he was in uniform and looked a bit more professional as he sat at the consoles. Hister, when was our last communication with Aspheria? 4 days ago, Officer Eckley. Do you need to send a new request? No, thank you, Hister. Like I said, I think the problem might be on your end, sirs. Joseph said, swiveling his chair around to us. The geophysicist and I exchanged looks again, and Johann said, perhaps then we should communicate with our commander, Matthew Sincall, to let him know that all seems to be in order. Well, hold on, there's no need to run away. I'm not trying to sound desperate or anything, but you're the first 2 people that I've seen since God knows when. I can send a message from here, it's no big deal. I would have loved to at least chat for an hour or 2 about what's going on above. Politics, sports scores, celebrity gossip, I don't care. I'm sure your vessel will need to wait that long before departure anyway. We could even have a meal together, Eckley suggested. I've already made contact with the ship in question, Officer Eckley, Hister told us. I sighed and shrugged. Whatever. Is there somewhere that I can shed out of this suit? Yeah, use my room straight through that door. Mi casa, su casa, Joseph told me as he asked Blaine what to type out to Commander Sincall. I pulled the door open and walked in, taking off my helmet and adjusting to the dim light, thinking for a moment that there was no need for feeling tense any longer. And then I saw the blood. There were scraps of paper torn from books covered in it all over the floor, and a smell of crap and bile that seemed to saturate the entire room. Everywhere I looked, there were clear signs of disorder and mental distress at the very least. And by the amount of bodily fluids on surfaces, maybe an indication of something far worse. Oh, sorry about the mess. Like I said, wasn't expecting company, Joseph commented as he stepped in the room and gave a chuckle. His nonchalant tone left me even more unnerved. What is all this? I asked anxiously. Toilet paper shortage. Not the smartest idea, but it beat having to clean up even more explosive diarrhea. He kept rambling as my eyes wandered further and focused at last on a small display case that was filled with a strange, skittering creature of some kind. As I stepped across another pile of bloody pages, he noticed my interest and started rambling about that as well. Yeah, those little things are the weirdest I've ever seen. Not insects or amoebic creatures, just a new species entirely, I think. Johann said you have a marine biologist. Oh, they're gonna have a field day, he whistled. They looked like a cross between slugs and termites, and there had to be at least a few million within his terranium, all crawling and seemingly consuming each other over and over and over again, until they seemed to create a single organism entirely. The strange glistening bugs were skittering and hissing just beneath a whisper as well. It reminded me of that broadcast. A word from Sincall. He wants to remain here and get a full mission update while Richie handles samples for the next couple hours, Johann announced as he stopped in his tracks at the doorway when he saw the same mess as I had, shock flooding over his features. Oh, fantastic. So you will be staying for dinner. White wine or red? Never mind, it doesn't matter. I only have white. Eckley ran off rambling about what to prepare as Johann kept an eye on the goop on the floor. I'm guessing that I don't want to know, he remarked. I thought of all the ways he had tried to get under my skin as well as his behavior back in the sub towards the others, and I gave him a wicked chuckle. I'll tell you over dinner. The dining room was probably only a little wider than the command center, but the lack of windows made me feel a bit claustrophobic, even as I saw Eckley sliding a steel crate over to the table to act as a makeshift chair. And best money could buy, Hope you like canned and rehydrated food because that's all we got, he apologized. The meat looked like mush, green and gelatinous. Is this what caused the crapopolis in your chambers? Johann asked aloud. Joseph settled in near the middle chair, the roller he had pulled from command, and started to pour us wine. When you've been down here as long as I have, gentlemen, I think you'll find that some things really don't matter as much as we think they do. I believe it was an American novelist that summed it up best, after living off the land for almost an entire year. A man is rich in proportion to the amount of things he can let alone. Who said that? Emerson, Thoreau. I've always been a man of science and not philosophy, Johann quipped back. Ah, but isn't philosophy the very pinnacle of science? Rather than study facts and figures, you get to peer into man's very soul. Our host fired back. Johann took a sip of his wine before making his next inquiry. So is that what Aspheria sent you down here to study? The soul? A touche. Is everyone this hostile on your team? Joseph was looking at me a bit perturbed, but I had to admit that I was actually on Johann's side for once. Our new companion was being unusually evasive about his assignment. I think what he's trying to say is that it seems unlikely that Aspheria would send us to the depths of the ocean for no reason at all. There's likely millions of dollars at stake, maybe more, and that doesn't even include the cost of our expedition here. In other words, it probably would have been easier for you if I was dead. Ackley replied point blank. Before either of us could make a response, the entire station trembled far worse than ever. And with the quake came a noise that sounded like a roar. This rumbling shriek of a beast that made every single part of me feel on edge. And that's why you're here, isn't it? I asked, pointing toward the unseen menace beyond our walls, as I got up and touched them, feeling the reverberations. Ackley stopped making jokes, his tone now deadly serious. It was asleep when I first arrived, but then HQ kept telling me to dig deeper, push harder, leap before you look, and so I did, Joseph explained. What is it? Johann whispered as the noise finally died down, but I had no reason to believe that we were out of the woods yet. I don't really know or care. We should call the commander, make sure there was no damage to the sub, I decided as I went to toss my plate. Hister can handle that. Trying to move out of here after seismic activity isn't wise, Officer Gilman. I tried it in the mech once to get a sample, nearly lost my arm in the process because of the unstable conditions. The fluctuating temperatures could easily melt you just like they did my robot's arm socket. You're safer here than anywhere else, he informed me. Another quick response to prevent us from talking to them directly. But I didn't press the issue and instead asked to speak with the computer at command to send the message. Oh, again, we can do that here. Really, I'm starting to think you just don't want to find whatever excuse you can to jettison back up to the surface world. I sighed, thinking fast of a reason to leave the room to see what he said this time. Fine, sure, but also I need to take a crap. Hearing that thing out there nearly made me shit my pants. So I'm free to drop a load, or do you want me to just squat here? I added before he could find another excuse. Joseph made no effort to stop me, and Johann stayed behind to distract him while I left for the command center. As I got closer, I could hear that whispering hissing again, and I knew that the looping broadcast was active again. So I went back to Joseph's room and scanned his shelves to see if he had an unsullied copy of Naval Communications. Thankfully, a few copies were intact, and once I had it, I crouched down next to the comms to write down the translation of the Morse code at the end of the loop. After deciphering it, it spelled out, "Leave." I pressed the book down against the table as I heard the growl beyond the wall louder, and my heartbeat began to beat loudly as well. Racing back to the mess hall, I shouted out to Johann a flimsy excuse for us to head to depressurization. except when I got there, neither he nor Joseph was anywhere in sight. "Officer Blaine, Eckley," I shouted as the growling grew closer. And then the shaking returned, this time with even greater intensity. The lights in the substation flickered as the thrashing got louder and closer, and then only darkness. As soon as it happened, I felt like I had to remain extremely still. There was no indication of any backup generator coming online, or alarms that told me systems were still functioning. It was like the entire world had suddenly disappeared in the blink of an eye, and now I couldn't even see the hands in front of my face. I called out to my companions again as the station shook and I heard a low hiss. The thought of dying in less than a second due to the loss of pressure this deep down danced across my mind as I slowly started to wave my hand out to feel for the wall. Crushed by thousands of pounds of water and pressure, I wouldn't even know that it happened. It would be a literal snap of the fingers if that gigantic thing hit the station and caused a hull breach in the right spot. My only thought now was of escape once I felt the wall. I guided myself slowly but purposefully toward the doorway that I had come out of, relying only on my memory of the area. When I felt its metallic frame, I could also see faint glimmers coming from the thick glass in the long tunnel that ran to the depressurization seal. With just the bare minimum of light, I moved toward the seal, and once there, I heard the crackling of noise from a comm system.
"Open the seal. I repeat, this is a code red. Structural integrity is less than 20%. We are under attack."
Cal. I opened a channel back, trying to see if I could figure out why the seal was not locked. The mechanism to force it open should have been online. "This is Officer Gilman. I copy. Get here as fast as possible," I told them as I read the code. Whatever system Hister was on, it was far more sophisticated than I had anticipated. But if the software was anything like a typical Navy issue, at least I had a chance to save them.
"Elder, what's going on there? Are you safe?"
Cal asked. The entire channel was filled with the endless static along with noise from the creature and the alarms from the sub. It was a cacophony of chaos. "Well, for the moment, doesn't sound like the same is true for you," I answered.
"Commander Sincall is issuing orders to evacuate to the substation."
"Bella and Richard are on their way. We'll be right behind them." I tried in vain to crack the seal code, working as fast as I was able even as the screen to the left of the comm lit up and showed me security footage of my friends on the other side of the massive door. I knew that Eckley had to have had the access codes necessary, but his presence was nowhere to be found, and I couldn't risk rushing to find him when my comrades were right there at the seal.
"Dear God, what is that thing?"
I heard Cal exclaim over the comm as the sound of crunching metal was heard. Atop that, a roar from hell itself. "Cal, I think I got it," I shouted back as I realized that I had somehow managed to bypass the primary. I was in. I frantically looked for the right set of commands and stood back as the seal began to open. His voice became overwhelmed with static as Richard and Bella ran into the station, their faces flushed with terror. "Cal, the seal is open. I repeat, Bella and Richard are safe. Get over here immediately," I told the nav officer as the comms grew heavier with interference. Then the lights on the station activated red and flashing along with alarms.
"Warning, potential collapse of depressurization seal is imminent. Seal will automatically lock within 22 seconds.
The scream from the comm had my neck hair stand on edge, and then there was a deafening crush, followed by the seal beginning to close rapidly. "Shit!" Richard shouted, but it was too late. The seal locked shut, even as the security feed showed me Cal and Commander Sincall reaching the connection point. A second later, as the crushing explosion hit again, they were gone. I saw their bodies fling backwards as the water pressure pushed its way into the damaged sub for a split second, and then the screen went dark as well. Richard tried in vain to see if we could open it again, but I knew that would only lead to our own demise. Not that it really mattered, since it seemed we might just be that creature's next target. I realized as the facility shook and the high-pitched screech of the monster filled all of us with dread. Multiple system failures. All personnel are to leave the seal immediately. Integrity at 56%, the computer announced. I grabbed Richard and pulled him away, following Bella into the connecting hallway as we were locked out of that room as well. And then finally, just when I was sure that these were going to be my last moments on Earth, the noise stopped and the deep ocean canyon seemed to suddenly go back to normal. The alarms on the substation also subsided, as I heard the overhead system announce that recalibration was beginning. I wasn't really listening. I saw just beyond the thick glass the writhing rocks of the trench walls. I hadn't simply been hallucinating before. Bella was trying to hold back from having a panic attack. Richard was still angrily yelling toward the seal. And then in the doorway, our Dutch scientist entered alongside Eckley as though nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. "About time," I snapped at both of them. "Is everything all right, Officer Gilman?" Johann asked calmly. Richard finally truly lost it, turned and grabbed the geophysicist by the collar and slammed him against the wall. "Is everything all right? Our sub just got destroyed in less than a few minutes by a behemoth. Our commander and navigational officer are dead, and we barely escaped with our own lives, only to be apparently trapped down here in this place with your stupid face." "Gentlemen, please," Eckley said, pulling them apart and trying to maintain peace. "This is my fault, Officer Gilman," he added apologetically as Richard stood back, his eyes still dilated with fury. "After you excused yourself from dinner, the conversation with your friend here grew stale, and so I offered to finally let him examine the fruits of my labor. We departed to the moon pool on the south side of the substation, and we weren't aware of the problem until it was too late." "You weren't aware? That thing is the size of a city and our sub was decimated," Bella remarked. "I am uncertain, even if we were here, if there was anything further we could have done for your fellow officers," Eckley admitted. "How the hell are you even alive? Who are you? I thought this entire place was a shell," Bella asked aloud, which made alarm bells go off in my mind as I remembered what I had learned before the attack. "Oh, reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated," Joseph said with a shrug before I could tell the others. She was now the one to lose her temper, her eyes still red from crying. "You're seriously making jokes right now. We're in the middle of a crisis, you prick. God, you're almost as insufferable as him," she said, pointing at Johann. The geophysicist seemed unfazed by the bickering. Instead, he put his hands in front of his belt loop and commented, "This fighting amongst ourselves is childish. It needs to stop." I spat back as I finally formed my thoughts, especially because we have bigger problems than just what's out there. I translated that Morse code at the end of the repeating message. I looked at Eckley. "I believe your computer has been compromised." "Well, that's not possible. Hister is the state-of-the-art technology. His artificial intelligence is more advanced than anything on Earth, but one thing that he can't do is lie." I bit my lip and I looked at him skeptically. Except for the fact that he said that he communicated with the commander, which clearly never happened. And you remember what you said about wires being crossed. How you never got orders from the surface. Maybe we were pointing fingers in the wrong direction when we should have been looking at the obvious, I suggested. Joseph suddenly was becoming far more defensive. "Let's indulge this theory for just a moment. If you are right, then we are royally screwed. Hister is the only thing down here that has the capability of communicating with anyone above." All of us stayed silent for a moment as the full emphasis of his statement became clear when he said, "In other words, no rescue." Richard shook his head as we started to move from near the seal. "There's gotta be a way that we can override the computer. I know the ins and outs of these robotics. Take me to the command center and I can take a stab at it." Maybe literally if it really is evil AI. Wouldn't attempting to locate a secondary system raise some red flags for it? If this thing really is a threat, we need to tread carefully, Johan remarked. You said that he can't lie, right? Good thing we can, Richard said as he started marching down the corridor. If I'm wrong, we all die anyway, so stop being a baby and show me the thing. The Dutch scientist surprisingly stepped out of the way without further argument, as Eckley reluctantly took the lead. I waited for Bella to walk alongside me, purposefully walking a few steps behind the others so that I could get her opinion on something else that was troubling me. Once we were within sufficient distance to have our own private conversation, I asked her, "Do you know anything about termites?" She gave me a puzzled look and I briefly explained to her all the things that had happened aboard the substation since our initial encounter with Eckley, including the creepy vibes that he gave me. Something is off and I think these microorganisms are a part of it, I said at the end of my summary. Bella looked toward the man, perhaps trying to determine if my misgivings were correct. He's also been down here a while, Elder. Maybe he's just on edge too. As we arrived at the command center and Richard activated Hister, I pulled her towards his room so that she could get a look at the insects herself. Bella made a gagging sound as she covered her mouth. For a second, I thought that she might vomit, and I didn't blame her. The smell of the bile was even more nauseating than before. When she saw the glass case filled with the unknown life forms, however, her focus shifted entirely, and she stepped through the unsightly mess to get a better look. The microscopic creatures skittered and scattered defensively as Bella grabbed a desk light nearby and used it to see them more clearly. I wasn't prepared for the reaction. They began to hiss loudly as though ready to attack. The noise grew louder and they stopped their mindless swarm to focus on Bella, pushing against the glass to try and stay out of the light. "And they like it cold," Joseph intoned from the doorway, causing us both to jump. He walked over and removed the light from her hands, staring at the swarm for a moment before commenting, "You think this is something? Your mind will be blown once we get to the moon pool." Richard told us that he had managed to locate the secondary system, which just so happened to also be at the moon pool. I told Hister we needed to check the seal down there. Should that thing attack again, we need to prep for an emergency evacuation, he said. "Oh, brilliant. So then all you can get a look at what Aspheria wants so badly," the station operator commented, leading the way once more. Bella gave me an uneasy look which confirmed she now agreed with my assessment of Eckley. "Watch your back," I whispered to Richard as we left the command center for the southern port to the facility. None of us said anything further until we had arrived at the massive steel doors which protected the station in case of a collapse from within the moon pool. Joseph hummed something under his breath as he punched the access code into the door panel, and then remarked, "Now keep in mind, just because I'm sharing this with you, full credit of this discovery will remain under my name." The door hissed open and all of us held our breath as we caught sight of what he was so eager to share. It was about the size of a small horse and it looked like a slug with black and gray splashes all over its slimy body. A few misshapen horns and possibly bones protruded from the gelatinous mass all across its back, and the entire thing pulsated like a beating drum as we entered the docking bay. "Amazing, isn't it?" Eckley said, his sharp voice echoing through the large chamber. "This creature has been down here beneath the entire world for probably centuries, maybe even millennia, and from what I've been able to tell with Hister's help, it isn't even alive." Richard gave him a look of shock. "What do you mean? I see it moving right now." Joseph's eyes shone like he was talking about his own offspring. "Don't trust your eyes. This is something that you have to see with your soul." Our marine biologist kept a steady gaze on the organism, and asked if she could take a sample. "Oh, I insist," was the answer she got, and it made me shudder. Everything felt wrong. The slug began to pulsate and shimmer with iridescent light, and Bella remarked, "Something about it, it's somehow beautiful. I wish I still had my book so that I could sketch it." "Be careful," I advised, and she took a step closer. "The data that I've gathered shows that it doesn't feel pain, and it doesn't sense the environment the way that we do. It views light and warmth as a threat, and it simply absorbs anything else in its way, having a seemingly unlimited supply of energy from which to do so," Joseph touted. "Well, that must be why Aspheria wants it so bad," I guessed, causing Eckley to snap his fingers and smile at me. "Bingo!" Richard drew a breath at last. "Lovely, so we weren't sent here for a rescue mission, but for an extraction of a million-year-old sea slug." He began searching for these secondary systems as Eckley shouted out, "Don't shoot the messenger." As Richard located the computer, I saw his hands begin to shake, and he slipped a pack of cigarettes out of his pocket, trying to calm himself, while his eyes stared down at my service weapon, and I didn't even have to ask what he was thinking. "It's loaded, don't worry." He relaxed a bit after the smoke. "You feel it too." I glanced over my shoulder toward the next room where the others were. "You mean how Joseph is a complete weirdo? I don't know who would have noticed that," I remarked dryly. Richard started to hack the system as he commented, "At first I thought maybe it was the isolation, but now I'm starting to think that it's something else." He turned to me and explained his unnerving feeling fully by saying, "Remember how I said how I've met him before, in university?" "Yeah. So why is he acting like this is our first encounter?" I was about to toss out the same theory that Bella had given me when I heard her scream louder than I've ever heard before. Richard and I bolted back towards the moon pool, catching sight of the slug, pulling her into its body the way that a vacuum sucks up debris. "Jesus Christ!" my friend shouted as I pulled my weapon out and started to fire on the creature rapidly. Johann and Eckley took a step back as Richard grabbed a wrench and tossed it, trying not to get too close. Our feeble efforts were meaningless as these screams stopped, and Bella's body went limp before finally the blob swallowed her whole, slinking its way over her lifeless corpse and then moving back into the center of the docking bay. My hands were shaking as I fired another round, and then I pointed the gun toward Joseph. "What the hell is going on here? I want answers, and I want them now," I shouted. I'm sorry, I tried to help her, but she must have provoked it, or got too close. I tried to grab her wrist as she fell on top of it. There was nothing that I could do," he sputtered. Richard finally stopped shaking as well, his sharp eyes upon Eckley. "Which hand?" "I'm sorry, what?" Joseph asked in confusion. "I said, which hand did you try to grab her wrist with?" Eckley laughed nervously, shooting a look at me and then Johann. "I'm not sure why that matters." I kept the gun pointed toward his face as I stepped closer to him until it was in between his eyes. "My friend asked you a question. Answer it." Okay, fine, just settle down. I think it was my left hand. Are you satisfied now?" Richard pulled me back, grabbing the gun from my hand and firing a warning shot right next to his foot, causing Joseph to jump back and cuss at him. "Elder, stay behind me. This man isn't who he says he is." The Joseph Eckley, the one that I know, the one that I went to university with. He was right-handed. He glared at the man in front and tried not to have a panic attack as he declared, "I don't know what you are, but you're not him." Johann was now the one taking the defensive for Eckley. "You know what I think is happening here? I think that we all just witnessed something very traumatizing, and now your brain is spinning out of control and you're trying to latch onto something, anything that makes sense. An easy target like our host here." Richard kept his finger on the trigger, a tear trickling down his face as he looked at Johann. God, I wish you were still the same asshole, because this would feel a hell of a lot more satisfying. And then he shot him straight in the face. The geophysicist's body lurched back, spasming as his entrails spilled from the wound. Except this wasn't blood and guts like you would expect, but the same goopy, gelatinous material of the slug that we had just witnessed Bella be devoured by. Dear God, I said, holding my hand against my mouth as I watched Johann's body begin to writhe, and then melt into goo before our eyes. And then the hissing of the insects caught my attention, except this time the sound was emanating from Joseph's lips. He was focusing on the melting corpse, reaching his hand out and whistling to it the way an owner might toward their pet. The slime reacted to his call, slurping up against his outstretched hand and dissolving into his flesh. The entire organism shuddered against his body as he stopped the chattering, his irises splitting and trembling as an inhuman voice filled the room. Your species understands far less than I anticipated. When first a part of the whole, all that could be detected was Joseph's fear. This was the same sensation with your physicist and biologist, until at last it was realized fear is all that your kind can grasp. It is the personification of this world, and that is why we must cleanse it. There is no need for fear within the body that we shall create, the body we shall share with all your kind. A gift of freedom, perfection, and intelligence to surpass even death itself. Yet you resist. Why? Why do you not join our call? See the world as it was meant to be. Joseph stretched his hand out again as though offering friendship. All of this shall be yours, and more. Richard cocked the gun and then pointed it straight at Eckley before responding. I think I speak for both of us here when I say, screw that. Just as he pulled the trigger, Joseph's face split apart, and a snake-like appendage snapped forward, grabbing Richard's arm and flinging him across the docking bay. Immediately, I ran for cover as the abomination moved like lightning towards me. No longer putting up a charade, it used Eckley's body to clamber across the walls the same way the insect did within the case, leaping towards me and thrashing my body against a large metal frame. More tentacles sprouted from its chest as Joseph's skin slid off and its maw widened, the voice ringing inside my head. Testament of corpses, heir to Octurn. The maw shall feast the flesh of this world, and this world shall become our flesh. The tendrils pressed against my own sides as mandibles pushed from where Eckley once had a jaw, splitting into 3 different patterns as he jabbed toward my throat. From across the room, bullet fire pierced the grizzly bug, the creature shrieking and screaming as Richard crawled up against one of the nearby crates, shouting for me to run. My eyes darted around, trying to find something that could help me fight this nightmare. They focused on the mech suit as I saw the faux Eckley was emerging with the larger slug, discarding its skin like a used tissue. The new amalgamation had its sights on Richard as he continued to pelt it with bullets, providing cover for me as I climbed into the suit and rapidly tried to figure out how to make it work. I didn't even have time for a crash course. I thought as I watched the membrane of the living slime was forming crystalline fractures on the steel floor, like cracks in a sheet of ice. Ice, cold. They like it cold. I recalled Joseph admitting as I saw a mechanism for a flamethrower on the mech's right arm and immediately turned it on high blast. The blazing heat of the gases shot out across the room, making the slug roar even louder, and that only made me focus the nozzle of the weapon with renewed intensity. The alien membrane didn't strike back this time, instead retreating like any threatened animal would and lurching toward the docking doors. The mech slowly lumbered across the floor as I kept the aim of the flamethrower and swept back and forth to show that I wasn't backing down. Once it was forced into the next corridor, I used the other arm to slam the emergency locking mechanism, sealing the doors in a matter of seconds. The creature shrieked, slamming against the metal. But for a moment, it was clear that we were safe. Turning down the heat, I placed the mech on low power and I climbed out, running to Richard as he pulled himself up on a crate. Don't move, you're bleeding, maybe internally too," I said as I saw it saturating through his shirt around his lower waist. "I'm sure I probably broke a few ribs," he remarked, trying to embrace the pain as he looked over at the computer. "Help me over there." I placed his arm over my shoulder, slowly aiding him to the system as he tried his best to ignore the constant pain. Sitting down at the keyboard, he accessed the network and started explaining what he was doing. "Cal said there was a relay post on the opposite side of the trench, probably about 6 miles past where the pipeline stretches. I can guide you from here to there. You take the mech." "What? No. I can't leave you here with that thing," I said, pointing over at the door. The shrieks had stopped and the silence only made me worried even more. That had to mean that Faux Eckley was trying to find another way to get in here. "We need to contact the surface, Elder. The station is compromised and so am I. The duty falls to you. Don't make me turn this into an order." I almost considered joking about succession of power but couldn't find it in me. The situation was too dire for even a mild flippant remark. "I don't even know how to run all the commands on the suit," I argued. "Like I said, I can guide you at least until you pass the pipeline. By that time, you'll know enough to keep going without me." "Elder, we don't have the time to argue. You have to go," Richard insisted. He was right and I knew it. Time was short and that creature would return. And that didn't even take into account the much larger version of it outside the station. Instead, my solution was to remove the flamethrower from the arm. With limited fuel there in the dock, it could protect him for a little bit, I told myself as I got into the suit and we activated communications. The plan was straightforward and it seemed pointless to exchange pleasantries. Our lives demanded that I leave immediately. The mech suit was at full power as Richard gave me a salute from the console and I dipped it into the moon pool. The seal to the outer chamber opened and water rushed in on all sides. In a few seconds I was surrounded and locked within, waiting for it to fill and sink me to the ocean floor. "You'll see the pipeline 33 meters to your east. Activate your high beams," Richard's voice told me as I touched the sandy ground. The darkness was pierced with the lights on the mech's helmet, and I told him that I saw it, moving slowly and cumbersomely toward the pipe. "And this is the easy part. Keep following it until you get to a junction. Elder, I'm gonna go radio silent unless I need to communicate," he told me next. "Wait, what if that thing comes after me?" I asked. My friend didn't respond. The channel was already closed. But he didn't need to. I knew if that creature wanted to crush me like an ant, it would. I kept the beams of low light just to avoid detection from it and had the arm of the mech against the pipeline, blindly moving across the trench as silence surrounded me. The rock walls, once slithering and covered in those tendril vines, were now as still as statues. Their motionlessness left me more worried than relieved as I had reached the junction. "Turn south," Richard ordered. I did as instructed, but stopped a few steps later when the pipe suddenly came to an end and I was stumbling into darkness. "Damn," I said as I tried to make sure that I didn't miss it. The pipeline had been destroyed into nothing but dust. I told Richard the situation and he reassured me that he would keep guiding. "I'll need to activate lights. That thing, it'll be here in minutes," I said worriedly. "Just keep moving." I recalled the concern that the mech could easily fall into an unseen pocket, and I would be dead before any monster did the deed. So even though Richard told me to keep it dark, my fear finally took a hold of me and pushed the button to turn the beams on high. The ashy sand appearing in front of me for the next few meters was a comforting sight, but I knew that it wouldn't remain that way. Now, with a clearer view, I started to earnestly push forward before the beast found me. Unfortunately, even with the ability to avoid pitfalls, the pipeline was nowhere in sight. "Richard, what do I do now?" No response. I tried again, this time only to find something was jamming my signal. And then I heard it. The familiar, incessant hiss. The swarm had found me. I saw the rock walls reshape and slither, flagellating themselves with crystalline tendrils as the roar grew louder and the ground beneath my feet shifted. The empty, blind tentacles searched for the source of the light, and even though my better judgment told me not to, I shut down the beams as I kept running. I did not get far. A few more missteps and I was tumbling downward, the heavy suit bashing against me as I heard the interior system alarms blare. Once I had stopped, I realized I couldn't move at all. The mech was now lodged, somehow in rocks or sand, I couldn't tell. The screams of the monster echoed as it kept searching, and I tried in desperation to call Richard again. The interference was even stronger, reinforcing my fear that I was likely going to be stuck there until I ran out of power, and then out of oxygen within the suit. According to the data readout, that could be within mere minutes. I closed my eyes, trying to steady my breathing and remain calm, although it really made no difference. Open or shut, only the dark greeted me on all sides. The suit was offline a minute later and silence now engulfed me. Even if I prayed, I didn't think a God would hear after all the hell that I had been witness to. There is no God down here, I thought as I tried to stay conscious. The system failure made any bodily function, even the flutter of my eyelids, feel painful. All that was left for me was an agonizingly slow death, and then I would join the darkness. Just as I felt my head start to pulse and I grew dizzy, I was sure that I saw something amid the shadows. Was it the monster? A hallucination? I couldn't tell, nor could I find out, because the next thing I knew, I was gone. Not even the hissing rang in my head. I should have been dead. Maybe I was dead. But when I next felt the world, I took a sharp breath and snapped my eyes open, my surroundings entirely new and unfriendly. I was tied hands and feet and against a wall, a woman staring down at me with a gun in my face. She looked every bit as frightened as me. "Why did Asperia send you here?" she asked. Where is here?" In response, she hit me across the face with the butt of her gun as hard as she could. "Don't play dumb with me, boy," she warned as she thumbed back the hammer of her gun. "I'll ask one more time. Why did they send you here?" Blood trickled out of my mouth as I desperately tried to tell her what I thought she wanted to hear. "Reconnaissance to Substation 46. The facility had gone dark for the past week. Please, for the love of Christ, that's the truth." I saw hesitation in her eyes and I looked around the small room that I was in. "This is the relay station, isn't it?" When she confirmed it, I remarked, "In other words, you already knew that 46 was offline, because you haven't been accepting any of their calls, have you? And for good reason. You've been inside the trench, I see it on your face. You know the nightmares that are hiding within the walls." She responded as she lowered her weapon. "The operator, Joseph Eckley, he was attacked by some kind of deep-sea gelatinous creature I've never seen. It wore his flesh like a suit," I told her. She didn't even seem shocked by that news either, so instead I said, We need to alert the surface to what has happened. This thing will absorb all life if we don't stop it." "I'm afraid that won't be happening," she answered, quickly explaining when she saw my puzzled expression. "My mission ends in a week's time and then I get to automatically jettison to the surface. Any communication between then and now is dangerous." So wait, the choice to go dark was deliberate, I realized. Correct. Once I realized 46 was compromised, I shut everything off in order to hide. Meanwhile, Eckley decided to pay a subscription to Bug Buzz monthly. I said with a contrite laugh, wishing that our situation wasn't so dire. I knew there was something off whenever his computer started sending me hidden codes in their transmissions. Before he was fully absorbed, the AI must have been able to detect the threat. Then the next thing I knew, the supercomputer itself had been compromised and stopped sending anything at all to me. So I decided to send something back, just in case anybody came knocking, like I assumed our lovely company cats would send, she said as she took a step back toward the console. My eyes widened as I realized what she had done. The Morse code, the message telling any rescuers to leave, that was you. Correct again, but I take it from the state I found you in that message did not get across to you in time. I thought of Richard looking toward the console. I have an officer still there trapped with that thing. She gave a sigh. Oh, then you must know by now that they're dead, or something far worse has happened. I'm sorry. I didn't want to believe her, but I knew that I had heard that sense of finality in Richard too. His injuries had already been too severe, and with this much passage of time, it likely meant the creature had found a way to reach him and absorb him in the same way as all the others. No, 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 I shouted as I tried to free myself of the bonds. Listen to me, listen, she told me, grabbing my shoulders and then ordering me to match her breath. Somehow, after a few gentle exercises, my heart rate had returned to normal. I am sorry for your friend, truly I am, but their sacrifice will be in vain if we risk opening a channel for any reason at all. We are hiding in the dark until the week reaches its conclusion, and then we're getting out of here. Until then, I will feed you and help you regain your strength. Maybe if you even prove trustworthy enough, you can get those bonds off. Haven't you already confirmed that I'm human? I said, nudging my shoulder in the generic direction of my bleeding lip. I have, which is exactly why I can't trust you. Now sit tight. I'll prepare our dinner for the night. The older operator left me for a moment and I looked around the room again. Everything now at last made sense as to why no communications had been sent back to the surface, and one definite fact dominated my mind. I had to make sure that no one above would ever know what happened here. One way or another, the station and the threat it represents had to be destroyed. The question was, how? And then I saw a set of controls that looked promising. Pressure valves. The pipeline that connects the relay to 46 must be controlled from here to send necessary power supply, and my new friend must have at some point manually cut it out as well. But that didn't mean that tubing it back on would be pointless. I thought as I recalled where the pipe had been destroyed. Pushing out enough chemicals toward the facility could ignite a chemical reaction and cause the entire trench to explode and collapse. Gingerly, I got up, scooting my body over to the controls to get a better look. I couldn't be certain that it would work unless I activated the system. It would only take a minute. Impulsively, I jabbed at the machine with my forehead, switching the console to life and watching as the monitors lit up. I waited for the pressure control to do the same, only instead for a chirp on the screen to inform me of an incoming frequency. Richard. That meant he was trying to find me already. I realized, and I almost ignored my host's warnings and opened the comms. Instead, I only allowed it to play the transmission and confirm her fears. It was the same chattering of noise from the insects that had been broadcast before, stronger now and more purposeful. My friend was gone and the monster was on the hunt. The inevitable feeling that it would find us and kill us made me feel paralyzed by dread. And then at last, the panel for the pressure valve told me it was back online, and I used my nose to reactivate it, lurching over like a misshapen worm. As the screen warned me of the dangers, I heard my host scream in alarm and run into the comm center. No, no, don't! She shouted as she lunged at me. Right as we collided, I used my mouth to grab the trigger, the alarms blaring louder as she slammed me to the floor. But I succeeded. The chemicals sputtered out and we both heard the explosion begin to cascade through the trench. Quickly, she shut the entire system down, cursing to herself as I spit a tooth out of my mouth. "Damn, you fight like a gladiator," I told her as I scooted myself back to the wall. "Do you realize what you've just done? Yeah, I killed that thing and anything else within that trench. You're welcome," I said as I watched the explosive chemicals grow larger and an underwater ripple effect occurred when it hit something in the distant horizon, likely the station itself. She managed to shut the pressure off again, saying a prayer under her breath as the explosion stopped and it grew quiet. And then I heard the monster roar and my heart sank. "What? How? Nothing could survive that," I said, sputtering like an idiot. "Nothing except a god," she whispered as she looked at her service weapon again. This time she had the face of someone who knew there were no options left. "It's on its way here. No, I can't override the systems to jettison us back up to the surface early. No supercomputer here, nothing to hack. The only thing we get to do now is watch. Watch and wait as death itself devours us whole." She picked up the gun and checked the chamber. "And did you know I didn't even have it loaded earlier?" She absentmindedly walked past me and over to the ammunition closet, punching in an access code and taking out 2 bullets. "I wished I had never used my robes to pull you from that canyon, but I guess there is no positive to all of this. Now I don't have to die down here alone," she remarked as she loaded the gun. "Wait, you don't have to do this," I screamed as she held the gun under her chin, pointed up so it would be over in an instant. "I never even got your name," I begged her as she thumbed the hammer back again. Her eyes twinkled with sadness and a resilience that I wish I could muster. "My name. I had almost forgotten my name," she said wistfully as fresh tears touched her cheek. "It's Keza Mason." I tried to give her a gentle smile. "Mine's Elder." "Elder, that's a strong name. Means wisdom, authority," she commented. The roaring was growing louder, the small relay station shaking. "Oh, what does Keza mean?" I said, trying to get her to put the gun down. "It means innocence, purity." "Keza, we can get out of this, I know that we can," I told her. The beast was almost on top of us. Her face was as still as a statue. "You know something, Elder? I think we should trade names. I can see your innocence as plain as day. And you can see it for yourself when we get to the surface," I implored her. "We won't be getting to the surface, Elder, but that's okay. I have a feeling, a very good feeling that we'll be seeing each other very soon." She reached in her back pocket and tossed a knife on the floor with her free hand. And then she pulled the trigger of the gun with the other. I screamed and shouted as her body crumpled to the floor, limp and empty. And then the hissing roared above the ceiling of the relay station. Tumbling over to one side, I used my feet to kick the knife toward my fingers. I sawed at the zip cords that she had used to bind me, staring into her dead gaze as sweat rolled down my face. When my hands were free, I stumbled over to the comms, trying to activate a signal to the surface. "Mayday, Mayday, this is the relay station, Ramina. Station is under attack and compromised." I heard the hissing right outside the walls and I saw black ooze begin to push its way through the seams in the hull slowly and purposefully. It would absorb me as soon as it got inside. I turned from the station and picked up the gun, my hands trembling as I stepped back to the console. The insects were now swarming around Keza's corpse and pushing their way into the wounds to fill her with their essence as I pressed my left hand against the comm again and thumbed the hammer of the gun back with my right. I swallowed a dry gulp of air, struggling to find the words as I saw her corpse melting away and beginning to tremor as the alien invaded her very being. "Do not send help, I repeat. Do not send help." I shouted into the comm and then proceeded to transmit the warning to the surface. Only one thing left to do. I'll whip the gun against my temple and pull the trigger. At least I'll get to see my friends on the other side. That can't be the number. It just can't, Wes said, taking off his faded John Deere hat and slapping it against his leg. I dried the corn before I hauled it over. I know what the moisture level is. Wes, I'm just the messenger. The machine checks and gives me back a level. Well, your gosh darn machine must be broken. It's just recently been recalibrated. I can run another sample if you want. Wes sighed. Years worth of anxiety exhaled in a moment. Y'all know how tough it's been for us. You dock off 10 cents a bushel and it barely is enough to cover costs. If you want to try the Grain Co. elevator, they might give you a better level. They're still using an older moisture system and might not dock as much. Wes shook his head. Cost of the gas driving to a new location will eat into the margins, Wes said, putting the cap back on. You people are the reason the family farms are dying. I'm just a lowly nighttime agent at a grain elevator. People above my pay grade set the prices, Wes. I run the machine. Wish that I had a say in this, I really do. The aging farmer paced, mumbling to himself as he did, trying to shake loose the anger from his body. His snit was moderate compared to others. One guy took a swing at me. Truth was, they all were right. The moisture limits were off, and the big ag company I worked for wanted to maximize profits by shortchanging farmers. Every night I stared into the eyes of broken men and gave them bad news. It ate at my soul. I was a force multiplier for misery. Oh, Jesus Christ and his crown of thorns, Wes finally said. Just take the corn. I'll figure something out. I'm sorry, Wes, truly. He waved me off. I don't want to hear it. Just take it. I'll be in my truck. He slammed the door as he left. It rattled the windows and knocked small knickknacks off my desk. As soon as he stormed off, my boss's office door squeaked open. He gone? He asked from the safety of his office. Yep. The door opened wide, and Larry, my fastidious boss, walked out laughing. Oh, thank God he left. He seemed heated. The faint smell of whiskey followed Larry's arrival. Larry took nips from a flask all the time and assumed that he was getting away with it. Larry was wrong. A common occurrence around here. He is heated, and he isn't alone. I've heard it all night. They'll learn to love the new rates, Larry said, staring through the blinds, or their corn will rot. Blood whooshed in my ears and I grit my teeth. My tongue was begging to give out a lashing, but I held it firm. There wasn't a ton of decent paying gigs in this town anymore, and I needed a place where I could study in peace. The night shift at the grain elevator was the perfect spot for me. Speaking of rot, around near Silo 10 I caught a funky, musty smell earlier. When you get a chance, go check it out. No sensor warnings and I didn't feel any heat. It's still worth a glance though. I can't have a fire now. Margins are tighter than a honey hole. A disgusting metaphor aside, he wasn't wrong. The price changes had wrecked everybody down the line, save the big ag companies. I glanced out at Wes, muttering to himself outside. Should we try to smooth things over? Larry, still lingering at the window, shook his head. No, I'm not going down there, he said, turning to me. But it might not hurt for you to smooth things over. We can't have everybody run into the Grain Co. elevator. What should I tell him? I don't know, the rates are temporary. We understand his frustration. Things will get back to normal soon, stuff like that. Are the rates temporary? Larry laughed. When have you ever heard of a company cutting into its profits on purpose? You want me to lie? Don't be such a Boy Scout, Larry said, walking away from the window and grabbing the latest issue of Farm Worker magazine. I gotta take the Browns to the Super Bowl. It's about to smell musty in here and it ain't gonna have nothing to do with wet corn, he said, cracking himself up. Go on and get. I'll be a minute. He left for the bathroom and I sighed. Wes might sock me in the jaw, but whatever stench Larry was about to release in the bathroom would be worse. A bruised jaw was worth the risk. I zipped up my hoodie as soon as I got outside. Since fall had tiptoed closer, the nights at the complex had gone from pleasant to, I don't really want to go out if I don't have to. My breath was visible and the cold stung my nose and the tips of my ears. The wind rustled through the fabric, sending shivers up my spine. I stuffed my hands into my pockets and I made my way over to Wes. He had parked his rig over the dump gate and was in the process of opening the bottom hatch of his truck. Once he caught me heading toward him, he stopped. The cold had helped to extinguish his fury. The man was more apologetic than mad. I hate the winter, I said as a way of greeting. Same. My hands get so chapped that they bleed, even with gloves on. I envy the bears who get to hibernate through this shit. Wes smiled and his shoulders dropped. His eyes went to the ground, letting his thoughts gather steam, before bringing them level with me. Oh, sorry about in there. I held up my hands. Don't, I get it. So many farmers have goddamned me lately that I'm starting to wonder if the big man has agreed to help. A lot of God-fearing folks forget the Lord don't like his name taken in vain. Amen, I said. I get why, but I'm just a dude that pushes a button. Forces larger than me are calling all the shots. Wes nodded. I can't imagine it's easy. There are worse fates, but I hate disappointing folks. Be straight with me. Why did they raise the moisture level barrier? I shrugged. Money? Wes spat. I can't wring blood from a gosh darn stone. They're gonna squeeze though. Squeeze too hard and you break the rock. You're right. I should have sold the farm last year, Wes said, resigned. I offered more than what it was worth. Told my pappy about the offer and the man damn near shed a tear at the thought of us moving on. That man lost a finger and his eyes didn't even well up once. How's he been? Wes waggled his hand. Has good days and bad, but it's all on a downhill slope. It's spread to his lungs, and just a matter of time now. Sorry about that, I said, patting his shoulder. I lost my dad 2 years ago, and I still feel the hurt. Wes nodded thanks and turned away. He wiped away a tear, but I wasn't going to call it out. We all need to grieve. You want me to fire it up? Yes, sir, he said over his shoulder. He unlatched the bottom hatch of his truck and the flow of thousands of corn kernels filled the night air. A grain elevator is exactly what it sounds like. Farmers park their trucks over a grate, let the seeds fall into a pit where a belt with little platforms drags the corn up to the top of a silo. Our elevator has 16 silos on site, and come harvest season, they'll all fill up. That's when the money comes in. It's also when things get dangerous. You wouldn't think that grain storage is a high-risk job, and mostly you'd be right. But dust stalks the silos. Falling from heights is frequent enough. Sometimes the air is putrid from unseen decaying matter. And worse, fine dust and built-up gases ignite and explode. About a year ago, 2 towns over, a silo exploded. Stuffed with hardened kernels, it was like an industrial-level pipe bomb. Killed a guy. You hear about that farmhand at the Braverman farm? Wes had asked. No, what happened? The belt below us squeaked. If you closed your eyes, the corn movers sounded like a rain stick. It could be pleasant, Less so if you hear it settle from inside a silo. If you're close enough to hear millions of kernels slide around, it'll be the last thing that you hear. Oh, he was breaking up a crust and he slipped inside. He was dead before the paramedics got there, Wes said, crossing himself. Wasn't wearing his harness either. 5 seconds to get trapped, 30 to die, Wes said. I don't even think it took that long. Moisture is the enemy in the bins. The corn can clump together and crust over a void. You step on that and you tumble down. Millions of kernels collapse. The weight crushes you into a pancake. You go in the grain and odds are you don't come out. I don't know about you, but $16 an hour with no benefits ain't worth being crushed to death by corn kernels. Braverman always cuts corners, I said. Can't say I'm shocked. Costly mistake. The family's gonna sue, surprised if Braverman doesn't just sell the land and call it a day. And Granco's been sniffing around anyhow. I offered Wes a cigarette and he took it. We moved away from the clanking elevator to talk in a quieter place. Ducked behind the office and lit up like we were two high school kids hiding from our parents. You're in school, right? Yes, sir, trying to finish off my business degree. You want to work in agriculture? I want to stay as far away from ag as possible, I said, taking a drag. I'd like to get out of this area altogether, if I can help it. Is your mama gonna miss you? Nah, she's living her life. Bingo almost every night with friends. I went once and she didn't hit. Called me a cooler and said that I couldn't come back. Wes laughed. That's a blunt assessment. That's mama. The woman doesn't let a topic pass without speaking her piece on it. Off in the distance, someone slammed a stick against the side of a silo. The reverberations echoed in the dark. Wes and I looked at one another to confirm that we had both heard the same thing. What the hell was that? Probably teens messing around. Ain't much to do around here except drink and raise a little cane. And Grant Platt told me the other night that somebody came and put up about half a dozen scarecrows in his fields. Noticed them that evening, but when he went to get them in the morning, they were gone. I took a drag off my smoke and tried to hide my concern. Truth was, the last few weeks, I'd been hearing noises around the complex. Shuffling, banging, whispers. The noises were odd, sure, but nothing to call a preacher about. What was curious, though, was where they were coming from. The rows of silos. Everywhere, too. Near the base, at the top, along the sides. Banging against the walls like somebody was trapped inside. Industrial complexes are rife with odd sights and sounds. But something about these didn't sit right with me. I mentioned it to Larry the other day, but he wasn't too concerned. Told me that it was the corn settling in the silos. I didn't buy it, but since I had zero desire to go inside and investigate, I let it go. Silo 10 was the epicenter. I asked my boy about the scarecrow thing and he mentioned it being some social media trend. He said, shaking his head in disgust. A way to scare people and record their reactions. Sounds mean to me, but the whole darn world seems to be trending that way these days. I heard the sound again. Someone dragged a stick against the metal ribbon at the bottom of the silos. Reminded me of a machine gun firing or a baseball card jammed in your bike spokes. I took another drag of my smoke and my hand twitched. Gotta be kids, I said, dropping my cigarette and crushing it under my boot. Let's put the fear of God into 'em. Wes nodded. When in doubt, turn to the good book. We headed toward the silos, moving fast and as quietly as boots on gravel could be. Whispering voices found our ears. Teens. When we got to the silo where they were hiding, I wrapped my hand against it. The dull thud echoed around us. A few people tried to suppress their laughter. It was coming from the next silo over. It was kids messing around. Though a weight had lifted off my shoulders, smoldering anger replaced the void. I had enough shit to deal with, and I didn't need to add running off clout-chasing teens to my list. I motioned for Wes to go around the silo counterclockwise and sneak up on them from behind. Let the man surprise them and give them a taste of their own medicine. I would go the opposite direction and hopefully catch them. If they ran well, I was gonna let them run. I don't get paid to chase people down. The kids shushed each other and dragged that stick against the silo's ribs again. This time they went slowly, the dead end ringing like a cracked church bell. I waited until they stopped and then took off, hoping to catch them in the act. As I rounded the corner, I came skidding to a stop on the gravel. A poorly made scarecrow loomed over me. He hung loosely from a stake and barely driven into the hardened ground. Even though I expected a scarecrow around the corner, the sight still surprised me. "Oh shit, look at his face," one of the teen boys said from the shadows. "He's scared as hell." Peals of laughter from about 4 boys and girls standing in the dark of Silo 11. "This is private property. You can't be back here." "Oh, relax, bro. It was a dumb prank," a guy said, walking into the dim moonlight. He was wearing a Letterman jacket with so many patches that you would think that he had served in the military, not the track team. "Oh, it's just for fun," a girl said, not brave enough to walk into the light. "We didn't mean nothing by it." The large fellow walked up next to his friend, big all over with a head the size of a backpack. He laughed, raspy and halting like a man straining to breathe, and he waved his hand in front of his face. "How do you work here, bro? These silos smell like 10 kinds of ass." "Maybe he likes the smell of ass," the Letterman said, pointing and laughing. They all chuckled and blood rushed to my cheeks. "You're trying to get this man in trouble with his boss," Wes said, stepping out of the shadows. They jumped worse than I had. A little revenge isn't so bad. Ain't justice, just revenge flipped upside down. "Jesus Christ," the kid said. "Watch your mouth, Dennis Temple," Wes said, his deepened dad voice coming out. "Oh yeah, I know who you are, who all of you are." He turned his attention back to Dennis. "I know your pa didn't raise you to blaspheme the Lord's name or curse out at strangers now, did he?" "No sir, he didn't," Dennis said, his eyes on the ground. "How many of y'all are there?" After a few seconds, 2 girls in matching red hoodies walked out. Wes shook his head. "I can't imagine none of y'all's parents would think highly of you bothering a working man just trying to earn his daily bread," Wes said, pulling the scarecrow out of the ground and handing it over. "Think your pa would be happy with somebody screwing with him at the mill?" "No, sir." "Apologize to this man, erase that video, and get on back home." And Dennis in his gaggle turned to me and mumbled apologies, and then he erased the video, holding up his phone to prove that he did. Once Wes was happy with the responses, he softened. "Now there ain't nothing wrong with having fun, just not at someone else's expense. We were young once and we did our fair share of rabble-rousing. Just don't do it at some innocent man's expense. Y'all understand?" "Yes, sir," Dennis said. He turned to me. "Sorry, man, I meant nothing by it." I softened. "I just don't want to see anybody get hurt. This is a dangerous place." Our alarm system squawking drowned my voice out. Red lights started blinking on top of the silos. We both glanced up and a sinking sensation rumbled in my stomach. I turned to the now genuinely nervous teens and shooed them away. They didn't hesitate. Wes craned his head up to the lights. "What's that mean?" Honestly, I've never heard them go off. In the distance, the office door slammed open, Larry's booming voice calling out. I turned to Wes. "I don't think he's in a good mood. The devil has more good times than old Larry." We started back for the office. As soon as we came out of the line of silos, Larry pointed his folded magazine at me. "Where the hell were you?" "Chasing off a few kids that had snuck onto the property. Why are the alarms going off? Something wrong with the elevator. It's what alarms usually mean, don't it? And you say you're in college, huh? Larry said, shaking his head. Useless as teats on a boar hog. I've never seen them go off before is all, I said, swallowing my anger. Don't sweat it, son, Wes said, patting me on the back and nodding at Larry. Larry never even finished high school, and look where he is. I chuckled and Larry fumed. The friendly joke got under his skin. Wes was needling and found a vein. It was Larry's turn to strike. If your wet corn broke my machine, repairs are going to come out of your pocket, Larry said, attempting a joke. It Hindenburged and we walked to the elevator in silence. Once there, it was obvious that something had jammed up the works because the belts weren't moving anymore. Wes's corn had emptied from his truck and was now all in the underground storage pit. A rock or something scooped up from the harvest might have found its way into the elevator and got stuck. I'll shut down the power, climb into the pit to get a look. If there's a jam, it's gotta be in there, Larry said. He handed me a flashlight and nodded down at the pit access hatch. I can't wait, I said, taking the flashlight. There was a ping as my feet hit each rung. There's no light down here because there isn't any need. The corn falls and the elevator belts scoop it up. Kernels don't need to see the elevator to catch it. They just get swept away. I had only come down here a few times and that was more than enough. The ground slopes toward the belt, so once you get off the ladder, you have to crab walk to stay stable. If there was a clog, it was probably where the belt goes vertical, delivering the kernels up to another conveyor belt where they ride until they're dumped into a silo. Those turns on the conveyor belts are notorious for clogs and are hard to fix without the proper tools. Operators and agents can try to dig out the clogs, but it doesn't go well. Repairmen call them finger strippers for a reason. I hit the bottom rung and my feet slid out from under me as I stepped down to the cement floor. I shone the light at the elevator. There wasn't much corn left, but there was still enough that it piled near the belt. I scanned my light along the bottom of the ramp, looking for any obstruction. What's the holdup? Larry yelled down, his dumb voice echoing in the pit. So far so good, I yelled back. Gonna get a closer look at the belts. Don't go too close, I don't want OSHA in our business. I rolled my eyes and took another step down the steep slope. My foot skidded in some loose dirt, but I caught myself before I face-planted. I chuckled at my luck inside. Screw this whole freaking complex. As I dragged the light across the backside of the elevator, something dull and gray came into view. It was enough to get me closer. Inching along, I finally reached the belt and placed a hand on it for stability. What in the world is that? In the pit's dark, I spied a split-open gray watermelon half buried in corn kernels. It must have been there for a while because the smell of rot grew with each inch that I got closer. I tucked my nose into my shirt. There's something weird down here, I yelled up. Yeah, you, Larry said, laughing to himself. I ignored him and shifted my light to the right. A blackened, twisted vine snaked out from the watermelon. A seed germinating down here wasn't impossible, but to grow to this size. I followed the vine until it ended at a pile of clothes. I was about to reach over and grab them when the flashlight beam bounced off a pair of coal black eyes. Oh shit. My fingers loosened and I dropped the flashlight, shutting it off. I scrambled back up the incline, but my foot caught on some loose kernels, and I fell face first into the concrete. My teeth caught against my tongue and my mouth filled with the coppery tang of blood. My smashed nose stung, and the gushing painted my lips and chin crimson. I had a hard time breathing without my nostrils whistling like a bored kid in church. Shaking off my growing ailments, I scrambled up the ladder, burst out of the top, and rolled away from the hole. I was breathing like I had run a marathon, pitched forward with my hands on my knees. Blood from my nose was pooling on the dirt in front of me. "What the hell is wrong?" Larry asked. "What happened?" "There's something down there." "What?" "I saw eyes." "You sure it's not a raccoon? We got raccoons down there all the time. Hate those thieving things." "I know what a raccoon looks like," I snapped, pinching the bridge of my nose to staunch the bleeding. It did little, but I convinced myself that it was working. "There was a watermelon and something." "Did you leave my flashlight down there?" "Larry, some grace, please," Wes said, his tone scolding. "What? This boy couldn't organize a hen raffle at a poultry farm. The hell does that mean?" I snapped. A stern glower from my boss recalibrated my emotions. "Sorry, I'm hurting is all." "You okay, kid?" Wes asked. No, but I'll live," I said, touching my nostril to see if there was fresh blood still flowing. "Sorry I dropped your flashlight, but I didn't want to get stabbed." "What, did you see a weapon?" Larry asked. I shook my head no. "Then what are you worried about, son?" "I was startled it happened so fast." Startled is a fancy word for scared. "Fine, I was scared, Larry. You wouldn't be." "Larry's scared of missing a meal, but that's about it," Wes said with a grin. Before Larry could shoot back, Wes held up his hands and gave him an affable grin. "Oh, just funnin', big guy. Kid, let me take a gander, huh?" Wes walked over to the hole, pulled out his phone, and stuck his head down. The light wasn't as strong, but it did the work because he caught the eyes staring out at him too. "Well, I'll be pickled," he mumbled. Hey, what are you doing down there?" No response was forthcoming. Without hesitating, Wes climbed down into the pit. "Hey, you can't go down there, it's a liability thing," Larry yelled to no avail. Seconds later, belly laughs came rousing up. "What's so funny?" Larry yelled down. "There's a clown in there." "Oh, there is someone down here, all right. I'll bring him up." I inched closer. My mouth went arid, the moisture sliding to my clammy palms. Finally, Wes came up, trailing someone behind him. As he breached the hole, he yanked up a scarecrow with him. He tossed it on the ground between Larry and me. "Here's your culprit." "Oh, hell's bells, kid. You were afraid of a scarecrow," Larry said in between guffaws. "I didn't know it was a scarecrow." "You didn't even investigate. Even the crows check out scarecrows. How you gonna make it in the city if you can't handle a straw man?" "Why was it down there?" I turned to Wes. "Was it in your truck and fell through?" No way. Those kids, maybe." "When would they get down there?" "Well, heck, I don't know." This scarecrow was different from the one that the kids had brought. Theirs was obviously handmade and not very well. Super understuffed with hay. Visible safety pins held the pants to the shirt, to the pillowcase head. Someone crudely drew on the face, made a real mess with the eyes and mouth. This one wasn't that. Outside the mangling that it had taken in the elevator belts, it was pristine. The outfit was a pair of old blue jeans and a gingham shirt with no visible pins. The clothes were so evenly stuffed with hay that they resembled a real person's body, muscles and everything. The head was an old burlap sack with black buttons sewn on for eyes and cinched with an ancient length of weather-beaten rope. A jack-o'-lantern's shark-tooth grin stitched in with white thread. Something that you would show off at the county fair, not drop in a grain elevator pit where nobody would see it. "Oh, whatever it is, it's out now. I'm restarting the machine and finishing this up," Larry said as he turned to head back into the office. But then he froze. He shot his hand up and pointed to the top of a silo. "Is that a person up there?" Wes and I followed his finger to the top of Silo 10. The only light up there was the blinking red alarm, but it was enough to outline a person. They weren't moving, just sitting, shoeless feet dangling, and holding on to the light structure. "What in tarnation?" "Ah, Jesus, if they fall, we're screwed," Larry said in a panic. Hey, what the hell are you doing? Get down now." The figure leaned back, their hands letting go, and they tipped off the top of the silo. "Oh shit," Larry said, sprinting. He got there first and came skidding to a stop, sending gravel skipping down the path. I tried to read his face. Was he looking at a horror show? But his dropped jaw and raised eyebrows weren't sending that message. The hell? Wes and I joined him at his side, and the same wave of confusion caught us in its wake. I shook my head, hoping to get my synapses firing correctly, but nothing changed. We were staring at the body of another scarecrow. Wes crossed himself. "This ain't natural. Nothing tonight has been." I didn't bother with the divine. I was stuck on the logistics of how a person got onto the silo roof in the first place. We kept the silo ladders latched closed, and they still were. But even if the ladders had been unlatched, climbing on top of the silo was super dangerous in the best of conditions. Hauling up a scarecrow while trying to climb up would be damn near impossible. "Who brought it up there? How?" I said, meaning for it to remain in my mind, but the thought couldn't help but escape into the wider world. Larry's face went from disbelief to anger. "Oh, someone's messing with us, and I don't like it one bit." He turned to me. "Where did those kids go? Did you know their names?" "They left right after we confronted them. I saw them leave." "I know them well enough to know that this ain't them," Wes said. "I don't know what this is, but I know that I don't like it, and I'd like to finish my business and be on my way." "Sure," Larry said, his rage cooling into simmering anger. "I'll take care of ya. Kid, add this guy to the pile and burn them both. I don't want to hear anything more about scarecrows." The two of them left. I walked to the straw man. The fall had done some damage and an arm had fallen off on impact, but otherwise it was fine. I kicked it to ensure that it wasn't alive or anything. It wasn't, thank God. "Hey, considering the fall should have killed you, you look okay." Off in the distance, the grain elevator started back up and I damn near jumped out of my skin. I turned back toward the office. Wes and Larry were standing near the truck scale and arguing over the price changes. The conversation was heated enough that a few spicy words were louder than the elevator's hum. "Larry, man, read the room." I turned back to the scarecrow. Chills prickled down my spine. I didn't like this thing, and the urge to kill it and its pal with fire grew like corn in the summer. "Alright, dude, you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here." And grabbing his hay-stuffed shirt sleeve, I had dragged his body about 2 feet when the scarecrow let out a faint, painful groan. I dropped the arm. It bounced off the ground, lifeless. Still, I shuffled a few steps back, my eyes never leaving the body. What the hell was that? There was thunking again. I snapped my head toward the silo. Opposite me, somebody dragged a stick slowly against the ribs. I wanted to believe the kids had come back around for another attempt at the video, but my rapidly beating heart told me that that wasn't the case. Wes had laid into them pretty good, and like all teens, they feared getting in trouble. The hair on the back of my neck was at attention. Despite the cool evening, sweat rolled down my nose. I wiped my face with my already sweaty palms and dried them against my dusty pants. My spiking adrenaline made my body tremble. Run or fight. I closed my eyes and let my instincts choose for me. Instead of running off, something that my legs were screaming at my brain to do, I slapped the side of the silo myself. It wasn't as loud or intimidating, but it sent the message that I was still here, damn it. They wouldn't scare me off so easily. Pressing my body against the silo, the metal was warmer than normal. I still needed to check the internal temperature, but dealing with a scarecrow-a-palooza was my top problem at the moment. I quietly slid along the metal. My goal was to surprise whoever was there. What I would do after that wasn't exactly clear to me yet. One problem at a time. I took baby steps, careful to not crunch on the gravel. The vibrations through the metal rippled through my body. I was sure that I was about to run into the person. I stilled and gathered my courage and ran toward my unseen foe, screaming bloody murder. The scarecrow's detached arm fell to the ground as I came around the corner. I froze, my brain failing to put together what I had just witnessed. How was the arm moving? Straw feet kicked up gravel as the rest of the body ran away. I circled the silo just in time to catch the hayman turning off the gravel path and disappearing into the shadows. With my wits reaching their natural end, I pulled myself together and did the only sensible thing. I ran. I moved like this thing was chasing me. I hadn't run this fast in years and my body rejected the effort. Joints ached and my lungs burned, but I wasn't stopping until I got back to the office. I got there just as Wes was taking the check from Larry. They stared at me like I had two heads. Larry shook his head and asked, "Oh, what's going on? Where's the scarecrow?" "It ran off," I said between gulps of air. "It ran away." "Well, that's my cue to get along. Y'all have a night," Wes said, quickly hopping into his truck and firing it up. Larry shook his head. "He's already mad about the raids. We can't afford to scare him off with stories of running scarecrows loose in the facility." "It's not a story, I saw it," I said. "And frankly, right now, I don't give a shit about scaring off clients. I just saw a scarecrow." A rock came screaming in from the darkness and slammed into Larry's elbow. It landed with a slap. He screamed, dropped the pen that he was holding, and cradled his arm. A welt grew, his skin reddening from the blow. "What the hell was that?" "Let me see your flashlight," I said, taking it from him. I shone the light over to where we had left the first scarecrow. It was gone. Larry, the man who never shut up, was stunned into silence. His mouth opened, but the words died on his tongue. Sweat stains grew from the armpits of his shirt, and his eyes darted back and forth near the elevator. His whole body trembled. He absent-mindedly rubbed his growing welt. I'm gonna head inside," he said, turning his attention away from the elevator to the office. "I got some paperwork too." He never reached the door. The scarecrow that Wes had freed from the pit was standing in front of it, staring at us. The elevator belt had mangled its shirt, tearing it open and exposing bloody hay inside. It didn't move, but I swear it was breathing. "How?" was all that Larry got out. Distracted as we were, another rock came crashing in and caught Larry on the shoulder. It was larger than the last, and the blow made him stumble and turn toward the thrower. Before he responded, another stone smashed Larry in the cheek. It split his skin open and blood spurted from the wound. Larry slapped his hand on the cut, blood seeping through the cracks of his fingers, and stumbled away. His eyes rolled back into his head and he crashed to the ground. Before I could help him, another projectile flew in and hit him square in the temple. A noise like a ripe melon popping open. Any consciousness that he was clinging to fell away, and his rotund body dropped like a dying ox. Blood from his head wounds pooled around his face. I shone the flashlight into the dark, and another scarecrow was standing there. At first blush, it resembled the other two, but then my eyes clued in on something that caused me to choke back vomit. The burlap bag and rope on this scarecrow's body were still wet with fresh blood. It dripped down and stained the front of the Letterman jacket that it was wearing. It was Dennis Temple, or at least a body that had been Dennis Temple. Did you kill the kid?" The scarecrow started laughing. A deep, back-of-the-throat laugh that was muffled through the blood-soaked hay. It reached behind his back and softly tossed something toward my feet. The mystery item rolled along the dirt and gravel until it came to a stop at my boot. It was a human heart. The scarecrow clapped its hands together and 3 more scarecrows emerged from the shadows around the elevator and office. 2 smaller ones dressed in red hoodies flanked a big fella. With the same disdain, they rolled their hearts to my feet as well. My mind raced for a way out of this mess. I patted my pants for my keys, but they weren't on me. I had left them in the office, which was being guarded by a sinister scarecrow. To think, I once thought this job would be less stressful than working at the town's Taco Bell. The letterman picked up another rock and hurled it at me. Unlike Larry, I dodged it, but I wouldn't be able to dodge everything. I glanced at Larry's unmoving body. The guy was an ass, but he didn't deserve this. I wasn't sure if he was dead or not, but I didn't want to be. I turned on my heels and booked it toward the entrance to the elevator complex. Despite my plans not to do so, I glanced back. The scarecrows had gathered around his body and were laying their hands on him. In between my footfalls on the gravel and my labored breasts, they began ripping his skin away in strips. That tearing and Larry's screams filled the night sky. When he finally went quiet, it was clear what had happened. They had turned him into a scarecrow. As the gate to the complex came into view, a pair of yellow truck headlights appeared and flew toward me. They burst through the gate arm, splintering the wood and sending it tumbling end over end. The truck wasn't slowing, but the driver lay on the horn. I jumped out of the way right before it would have turned me into a grease spot. As it zoomed past, I smiled. Wes had come back. The chasing scarecrow stopped, momentarily confused, and that slight hesitation cost them. Wes slammed into them, sending the straw men scattering into the wind. The truck came to a skidding stop just outside the office building. Wes hopped out and yelled for me to give him a hand. I didn't hesitate. I ran back as fast as my feet would fly. Wes dropped the tailgate, and he was pulling out 2 propane tanks as I caught up with them. In between my gasping breaths, Wes attached a length of orange hose to the nozzle of each tank. The hose connected to a water pressure gun, or so I thought. Wes pulled the trigger and a bright burst of orange flame roared out of the tip. "Weed burners," he said, handing me a propane tank. "Saves the pain of weeding my family plot by hand. I figured it would cook these devils up and send them back to the 7th circle of Hades." "Hell yes," I said, firing a small flame. "Why'd you come back?" "You've always been square by me, and it didn't feel mighty Christian of me to leave a good man in a lurch. How'd I be able to ask the Lord and Savior for help if I'd tucked tail and ran when one of his flock needed me?" he said with a smile. "Now let's toast some ghouls." I laughed. What in the childhood dream was this? We clinked the tips of our guns together and fanned out. Besides the original 2, there were the 4 teens and Larry. I didn't see his body among the others, but I figured he was around here somewhere. Wes walked up to the armless scarecrow who had been partially de-stuffed from the impact with the truck. With no hesitation, he pressed the trigger and burned the scarecrow to embers. As the flame ate away at the burlap bag, the monster let loose a painful yell. A white ball of light burst from the ashes and rose into the night sky, a dandelion spore catching a ride in the breeze. Before too long, it was just another white dot in a sky full of them. Wes moved on to the next victim. I came across Dennis Temple first. The accident had shorn his legs from the rest of his body. The top half was crawling along to where they had landed. Before it reconstituted itself, I aimed my gun down, sighted its burlap head, and blasted it with flames. It screamed and I grinned as the hay caught fire, curled, and burned to ash. Another white ball shot up into the sky. I moved on, Wes's demolition derby had done the lion's share of the work. These things had been stunned and now we were just mopping up. Each time we came upon a pile of hay, we blasted it with fire until it didn't exist anymore. Within 10 minutes, every visible scarecrow had become a pile of ash that drifted in the breeze. I finally let go of the trigger. The propane tank was lighter than it had been. I pulled the trigger again and no flame came leaping out. I turned to Wes. I went a little crazy. It's hard not to. Our burning spree had brought us back around by the grain elevator. The hatch was barely visible under the gravel and kernels that had been kicked up in the fighting. Wes placed his propane tank down and wiped his sweaty brow. Is that all of them? Larry, I said. I didn't see Larry. Is he? I nodded. Wes made a sign of the cross. He was an idiot most of the time, but even idiots shouldn't go out like that. Everyone deserves a chance at redemption. Yeah, was all that I added. We should find him or whatever he is now. If we don't, we'll find new people to, in fact, change. What even are these things and where did they come from? Hell, Wes said. They came from. He never finished the sentence. The hatch opened under him and he fell into the grain elevator pit. He let out a painful yelp as the propane tank clanged against his body. The elevator started up and Wes hollered and scrabbled away from the quickly moving belts. I trailed off. Out of the corner of my eye, a familiar figure was standing near the hatch controls. Larry, or what used to be Larry. He was one of them now. He turned his bloodied, burlap head toward me and nodded. Oh damn, I said as Larry took his first lumbering step toward me. I tried lighting up my propane torch again, but it was empty. Oh, come on, I tried again, and nothing happened. Larry's first few steps reminded me of a baby deer just figuring out how to walk, but it didn't stay that way. Bambi eventually found his footing and started running at me. I dropped the propane tank and booked it in the opposite direction. Larry followed. I didn't have a clue where to go. I couldn't just run away. Plus, I didn't want to abandon Wes down in the pit. The man had come riding to the rescue in his pickup. What kind of man would I be if I left him in there? Letting Larry get turned made my guts tighten. A guilt I was sure would grow with every day that I was on this side of the soil, but I couldn't change it now. The musky smell of overly wet corn caught my attention. I was near Silo 10. A divine spark set off a raging fire in my brain. I might not be able to outrun this thing, but I could trap it. I darted off through the row of grain bins until I got to a supply shed. Thankfully, Larry was lazy and never locked these. I ripped open the doors and flipped on the overhead light. On the shelf was what I had come for, a safety harness and a guide wire. I slipped on the harness and wrapped the wire coil around my arm. Before I darted back out, I grabbed a ventilator mask and put that on as well. I exited the shed and clocked Larry, now full on running. Bits of hay falling off his body with each long stride. I took off at a full sprint myself, heading for Silo 10. I kicked at the ladder latch until it came free, sending it sliding down. As soon as it hit, I hooked down one end of the guide wire to the base of the silo and the other to my harness. With the carabiner's click, I started up the ladder. I was 5 rungs up when Larry's hay hand grabbed my boot and yanked me down. I swung my free leg at him, but Straw Larry was more nimble than Human Larry had ever been. With a strength that shocked me, he caught a hold of my legs and yanked down with all his might. The tips of my fingers slipped off the rounded rung and I went crashing to the ground. The straw man helped break my fall, but it was still far enough to force all the air from my lungs. I rolled onto my stomach and away from Larry's windmilling arms. I coughed and finally caught my breath in the middle of the roll. Right after my first breath, Larry's foot found my stomach. Pain rippled through my body and I vomited. Another swift blow to my ribs caused one of them to crack, constricting my muscles around my chest. I rolled away again, but the guide wire worked like a leash at this point. I wouldn't be able to run with it still attached. Even though this wasn't my former boss, I recalled every time that he had pissed me off and let that anger strengthen me. I scrambled back up to my feet and turned to the scarecrow. He ran at me again, growling and snarling. I yanked hard on the wire, pulling it taut, and ran at Larry. The wire clotheslined him, sending him sprawling to the ground. I had hoped it would slice him in half, but knocking him down gave me enough time to make it back to the ladder and scramble up. Larry grabbed the first rung as I reached the top. I slid the ventilator over my face, unlocked the escape hatch, and threw it open. Instantly, a wave of noxious gas hit me. The silo being warm against my back earlier made sense. Something nasty and dangerous was brewing in here among the millions of kernels. Muttering a quick prayer, I climbed into the hatch and found the top rung inside the silo. This bin was almost full, so the trip down into the kernels was short. I gingerly placed a foot on the corn, and it shifted under my weight. I placed my other foot down, and despite some more shifting, I stayed level. A shadow fell over me. Larry had arrived. I wasn't sure if these things had rational thoughts, but I swear I could see the wheels turning inside its stupid burlap head. Come on down here. You come down here and you can get me. Just a tasty treat waiting for you. It stood there unmoving, unblinking, waiting. I wanted it to get in here already. Even with the mask, the gas buildup in here was intense. My eyes started watering. Larry found the wire next to his hand and picked it up. With a strength that no being made of hay should have, he yanked on the wire and pulled me toward the hatch. Sensing a win, Larry wrapped the guide wire around his arm and started pulling me up. My body ascended and I squirmed around to stop it. I tried rocking my weight backward, hoping to tip Larry over, but he held firm. Everything that I tried to do to stop him had failed. I was getting closer to being within his arm's grasp. From the tips of his stray fingers, tiny razor-sharp thresher blade tips emerged like a cat's claws. They twitched in anticipation of the soft skin they would rip into. The idea of those blades slicing off my face focused my brain. I had to free myself. It was now or never. The loose corn ground against my boots. A kernel caught the side and shot out, ricocheting around the silo. As it bounced around, my thoughts followed suit. I glanced back. A thin layer of clumped corn kernels spread across the middle of the silo. I smiled. Come on, big fella, pull me up. I screamed and relaxed my body. Larry kept yanking the wire, slowly bringing me up to the hatch opening. The tip of my boot found the first rung of the internal silo ladder, and I braced both of my feet on it. I let him pull me within a few inches of his grasp, the whole time keeping my legs cocked and ready to fire. As he leaned over to pull me the rest of the way up, I pushed in close. I was face to face with the scarecrow. The stench of rotting hay and death wafted off the burlap sack. I braced my arms against the hatch opening, leaned all my weight back on my heels, and pushed off with all my might. Larry's grasp slipped, and I fell butt first into the corn. Loose kernels took to the air as my body crashed below the grain. The vibrations of thousands of corn kernels rumbled as my body sank lower. 5 seconds to get stuck, 30 to be engulfed. Larry recovered from nearly tipping in and gripped the guide wire again. He tugged with all his might, but the weight of the corn held me in place. With every slight movement of my arms and legs, I became more trapped in the grain. The pressure grew, squeezing me like a corn cocoon. If I went too far in, I'd be crushed to death. The guide wire went slack and my body dropped another inch. I wasn't sure what was happening until Larry cannonballed right near me. Even under the crushing weight of the corn, I allowed myself a smile. He thought that he was landing on solid ground, but as soon as his straw feet found the kernels, he broke through the crust and fell into a void. The rumble was instant and loud. Millions of kernels broke free and fell toward the newly formed hole in the middle of the silo. The pressure that had nearly crushed me to death had disappeared in a blink. Larry was instantly engulfed. His thresher-tipped fingers disappeared below the corn. With the crust now collapsed, my newly born body emerged from the cocoon. I hung from the guideline over the gaping hole and allowed myself to smile. Larry was somewhere in the churning grain, hopefully crushed into a hail bay. I swung myself back onto the ladder and clambered out. I slammed the escape hatch shut and I latched it. The struggle had nearly torn the bulky ventilator off my face, so I finished the job and I threw it into the dark. I took in a deep breath of fresh air, my lungs purging the gas that I had ingested, and scrambled down the side of the silo as fast as my body could go. I was so concerned with getting down that I hadn't noticed Wes standing at the bottom of the stairs, cradling a hurt arm and urging me on. Is he dead? I think the only way to kill it is to burn it. Well, how are you going to do that if he's trapped? I grabbed Wes's hand and placed it on the side of the silo. Oh, this thing is just waiting for a spark. Golly, he said, taking a step back. You weren't the only one with wet kernels, I said. I'll be right back. I unhooked the harness and sprinted away from Silo 10 and back toward the office. Bursting through the door, I scrambled to Larry's desk and started ripping open drawers until I found what I was looking for. An old bottle of whiskey. Never had I been thankful for somebody being an alcoholic, but tonight had been a night of firsts already. Why stop with zombie scarecrows? By the time I got back with the bottle in my hand, Wes had done the math. I grabbed his propane tank, opened up the valve, and placed it at the base of the silo. Wes started up his truck and nervously drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, his foot hovering over the gas pedal. I moved to the passenger side of the truck, pulled out my lighter, and I lit the rag. It was go time. The kernels inside the silo were still shifting. Either the remains were still collapsing or Larry was trying to claw his way out. I let the fire on the rag grow. Once it had reached a critical point, I whispered a prayer and hurled it at the base of the silo. It smashed into the propane tank. I ducked into the truck and screamed to drive. Wes, hurt arm and all, didn't miss a beat. The man sent us into hyperspace and we tore ass down the gravel road, kicking up rocks as we blew past the busted entry gate. The propane container erupted. That bomb wasn't the end of the line. It was the catalyst that would ignite the bigger and dirty volatile gas inside Silo 10. The ribs of the silo flattened under the growing internal pressure. I guess those chemistry classes that I took at school weren't such a waste of time after all. We were a half-mile down the road when the silo boomed. A flash of white light illuminated the road in front of us for a fleeting second. The shock wave slammed into the truck, causing us to fishtail. Wes pulled over and we scrambled out. A huge fireball rocketed into the night sky, a Midwestern Nagasaki torching everything that it touched. How do you like that? Wes said, staring at the growing blaze. I don't, I said, but goddamn, what a beautiful sight. I'm not one to go around blaspheming, but goddamn seems like the only right word at the moment. I laughed. He was right. Goddamn indeed. I didn't remember anything before the white room, just the sterile smell of bleach and the gentle hum of a fan. I awoke on ice-cold floor tiles, face down in a puddle of my own drool. I remembered my name instantly. I was Mary. I was 38 years old, but that was it. I had no idea who I was or where I had come from. The room was stark white and clinical, with 4 TV screens in front of me. The screens were old, the kind from my childhood, with a built-in VCR, chunky and box-like. When I woke up, they were on standby, static prickling across the glass. I demanded where I was, my mouth filled with rotten tasting egg. Silence. The buzzing lights above flickered off, leaving me in the dark, disoriented and, I guess, forced to look at the 4 screens. Below them sat a small glass table with a steaming cup of coffee and a single cookie. For a while, I was too scared to move. I sat on my knees trying to remember anything about my life. But like broken puzzle pieces, I had come apart, unraveling, left only with my name and age. Was I suffering from memory loss? I checked myself over, testing for a head injury. I knew exactly how to perform health checks, almost obsessively checking for concussions. That told me something. I was in the medical field perhaps, but this felt personal somehow. Too personal. This felt, oh God, like I had done this before. And just like those times, revulsion crept up my throat, panic twisting in my gut. But I didn't know why. I didn't know why I felt sick to my stomach, why my cheeks burned and why my hands trembled. I was used to checking for bumps and scrapes. I knew exactly where to prod my scalp, running my fingers down my skull. But I was fine. I tried to escape. There were 2 cameras on the ceiling, which meant that I was being observed, and my instinct screamed at me to get the heck out. At that point, I didn't care how. I tried the door. Locked. I screamed to be let out. Again, silence. Heavy, suffocating silence that was too loud. That captured my every breath, making me too aware of my frenzied gasps. I noticed a pile of tapes sitting on the VCR player. I crawled forward and grabbed the first one at the top of the pile. February 2024 was scrawled in block capitals across the label. I felt like I was in a trance, like something was compelling me. The tape felt right in my clammy hands, as if I had held it before. I slid it into the machine and pressed play. The screens flickered on. A room full of kids. Teenagers. They looked like college students or high school seniors, 17 or 18 years old. The room was identical to mine but smaller, the same 4 white walls. But unlike my room, theirs was empty. No TV screens and no coffee or food. Just a blank white wall staring back at them, and a single bucket for a toilet. I had no idea how long they had been inside. But when one of them, a blonde girl with a high ponytail, jumped up and began throwing herself at the walls, panic clawed up my throat. This was the start. The girl started screaming. Almost immediately, another girl, a brunette with tight curls, stood up, strode over to her and slapped her across the face. I tensed, waiting for a fight to break out. But instead of hitting back, the blonde wrapped her arms around the brunette, sobbing into her shoulder. A moment later, they both returned to the others, sitting cross-legged on the floor. I counted 10 of them, 5 girls, 5 boys. They wore identical white shorts and t-shirts, blending into the walls and floor. They looked disoriented, just like me. They sat in a circle, wide-eyed, staring at each other like they were strangers. No. I moved closer, glued to the screen, and I watched them back away from each other. One boy shuffled back, jumped up, and tried to run, smacking straight into the wall. They were strangers. I wasn't even sure that they knew their own names. My heart felt like it was lodged in my throat. Were they nearby? Were they in the next room over? If they were in the room next to mine, then we could help out each other. Already I was slamming my fists against the door, then the walls, screaming for help. "Hello?" I shrieked, before my cry died in my throat, and I almost laughed. I wasn't watching a live tape. The realization slowly settled in, like cruel pinpricks sliding into me. I turned back to the screens, stumbling over and grabbing the second tape. March 2024. Something thick and slimy filled my mouth. I placed the tape back on the pile, forcing myself to stay calm. I was an adult, and these kids, wherever they were currently, needed my help. Well, that's what I kept telling myself. But every so often, my gaze would find the screens once again, and I felt myself unraveling. The footage was recorded last year, and the pile of tapes were clearly documenting their captivity. Sure, they could have been rescued, I told myself. But if these kids were safe, I wouldn't have been kidnapped. I was already putting the pieces together. Whoever took me wanted me to watch these teenagers inside this white room with no door, no escape, no food. Instinctively, I drank the coffee and I ate the cookie. Whoever these people were, they weren't interested in hurting me. They wanted to hurt these teenagers. The coffee was lukewarm and the cookie tasted familiar as somehow, oven-baked and fresh. There was icing, but it had been scraped off. Something told me that I wouldn't be in the room for long, not long enough to get hungry or thirsty. I found myself scanning the ceiling for more cameras. There was one attached to every corner, most likely recording every angle of my face. My stomach twisted as I studied the monitors. Like mine, they displayed different angles of the room trapping the teens. Screen 1 zoomed in on the girls. 4 of them had gathered together already, with one stray boy joining them. Screens 2 and 3 focused on the boys, appearing to be already arguing. Screen 4 was a bird's eye view of all of them. "Alright, everyone listen up." One of the boys stood. He looked to be the leader type, tall and athletic looking, thick brown hair and freckles. The kids didn't have names, so I renamed him Boy Number 1 in my head. Boy Number 1's voice was shaking, but he kept his expression stoic. I noticed that he kept scratching at his arms, a nervous tick. "So, I'm pretty sure somebody's playing some messed up game." His head tipped back, eyes glued to the camera. Screen 3 zoomed right into his face, his twitching bottom lip. He was trying not to cry. "But we need to keep a clear head, okay? Does anybody remember anything about themselves?" He pointed to himself. "I don't know my name. I just know that I'm 18 and I just graduated high school." Boy 1 took a leadership role. He was reluctant, but the other kids seemed to gravitate towards him. They went around the room and it became clear to me that these kids had their memories screwed with too. The blonde, I named her Girl Number 1, who had freaked out earlier in the tape, was immediately intriguing. She didn't know her name, but she did tearfully exclaim, I have a mom and I know she's looking for me, which triggered paranoia among the group. The brunette, girl number 2 who had slapped her, brought up the possibility of girl number 1 being in on their imprisonment. Well, that's ridiculous, boy number 1 snapped. He stood up, assuming his role of leader. This room had no concept of time or night and day. They could have been arguing for hours and they wouldn't even know it. Why would she willingly join in on whatever this is? Well, this is clearly some kind of test, girl number 2 said matter-of-factly. What if she's, I don't know, the daughter of one of the researchers, or even a researcher herself? I told you I'm not in on this. I don't know anything about this, girl number 1 shrieked, pulling her legs to her chest. She seemed genuinely afraid, burying her head in her knees. Please, I just want to go home, she screamed and the others jumped. I want to go home. I want my mom. And girl number 2 started to speak, only for boy number 1 to shoot her the mother of all death glares. Don't. He shuffled over to her. The last thing we need is to lose trust in each other. And girl number 2 averted her gaze, sliding away from him. Get the heck away from me. Boy number 1 looked hurt. I could tell that he was the weakest among the group. He made the mistake of acting like a leader, but he was doing just that. Acting. In reality, he was just a scared teenager. His bottom lip wobbled, but he shook his head, forcing a wide and gritted smile. Aye, aye, Captain. Ah, Freckles thinks we're getting out of here with the power of friendship. Another kid, a guy with thick blonde hair and glasses, was curled into himself. I was sure that he was crying, but no matter how many times the cameras tried to catch his face, he avoided it. I called him boy number 2. Oh, that's adorable. I'll make sure to rely on friendship when we're starving. To my surprise, boy number 1 crawled over to the guy laying down beside him. Go away. Boy number 2 grumbled into his arms. I'm trying to manifest my way home. Boy number 1 snorted. It was the first time that I had seen him smile. And you call me delusional. The March 24 tape outlined what looked like the first month of their imprisonment. I watched it every second, every camera angle. The kids got used to their captivity, distracting themselves with games of charades and sleeping lions. They each gave up a clothing item so that they could create a makeshift curtain for the toilet. They were given new clothes, but it was weekly instead of daily. Glued to the tape, I barely noticed someone had replaced my coffee with a new one. This time I was given a cupcake, again with the icing scraped off. Ignoring my own circumstances, I watched the kids slowly start to unravel. Food was given to them every morning at exactly 7 a.m., and it was good food. I watched them receive trays of McDonald's breakfast, and for the first few days and then weeks, they seemed okay. The kids started to form a plan to escape, orchestrated by boy number 1. Their plan was to wait until their food was delivered and then attack in numbers. However, when their breakfast was delivered, it was a single slice of bread. I already knew what game their kidnappers were playing. After 3 days of no breakfast, boy number 1 caught on. They're punishing us. He spoke up while they were sharing half a slice of bread. The portion sizes were getting smaller and smaller. Boy number 1 was rationing his own, tearing pieces off and eating them in intervals. He was also hiding yesterday's water down his pants. The kid was smart. We formulated a plan to escape, and the people watching us don't want that, he said. Boy number 1's lips formed a small smile. He was planning something. So for now, we play their game. He was right. The kids stayed mostly silent all day, and they were rewarded with 3 cooked meals. Following boy number 1's words, the teens stayed quiet. Boy number 2 suggested that they name themselves. Boy number 1 wanted to be named Clem because it felt right. Boy number 2 insisted on Ryder. Boy number 3, who I was pretty sure was narcoleptic, curled up in one corner, was named Z, like he was sleeping. Boy number 4, a hard-faced redhead who started most arguments over food, refused to be renamed, so the others called him Shitface. Finally, boy number 5, a kid with a buzz cut, just shrugged and called himself Buzz. And girl number 1, the blonde who would calm down, didn't want to be a part of the naming ceremony. But halfway through, she squeaked, "Sabrina, I like the name Sabrina." And girl number 2, the fiery brunette, immediately called her out. "Okay, but why Sabrina?" she demanded, her eyes narrowed, hands planted on hips. "So that's your real name?" She was ignored, and after realizing that her theories weren't helping, girl number 2 sighed and reluctantly named herself Scooby. And girl number 3, a quiet kid with pigtails, shrugged. "I like Ruby." Girl number 4, the frizzy redhead with glasses, didn't speak, so the others gave her a name, Mittens. Girl number 5, who had come up with the naming ceremony, smiled wildly. She pinned her dark curls into a knotted bun. I had never seen an 18-year-old wear butterfly hair slides. "Brianna." The tape ended on her wide, smiling face, the screen flickering off. I didn't have any concept of time in that room, but I had a feeling that the tape had lasted around 2 hours. 2 hours per tape and 3 coffee refills that I never saw. While I had been watching, another 2 cupcakes were balanced on a plate. I checked them. The icing had once again been scraped off. For a moment, I was paralyzed, coffee bile sliding back up my throat. "Who are you?" I asked the people watching me. When I was met with no response, I kept my voice calm. "What are you doing to these children?" I had so many questions. Why was I being made to watch these tapes? Why VCR in 2025? Were these kids alive or dead, and did I even want to know? When my cry bounced back at me, reverberating around the room, I felt myself snap. I screamed, but it felt like screaming into a vacuum. My own cry sounding wrong, foreign, and not even mine. I was trembling, my chest aching, my throat on fire. I didn't want to watch it, I couldn't. But already I was crawling over to the pile of tapes and choosing April 24. Whatever happened to these kids, I couldn't stop it. But every time that tape slipped from my fingers, I dropped to my knees and grabbed it, running my fingers over the surface. It felt personal and wrong, and yet right in my hands. The scratchy label and the smooth plastic of the tape. I rolled it around between my hands, my gaze glued to each screen. I wish that I never watched them. I wish I never knew their names. But I had to know what happened to them. I had to know what 12 months of captivity did to these kids. Feeling sick to my stomach, I slid in April 24. The screen flashed blue before flickering to life on a still shot of boy number 1, Clem, with his ear pressed to the door. The others were gathered around, sitting in a semicircle. I had missed several days. The kids looked worn out and tired, their clothes filthy and torn up. There was a giant, crayoned rainbow on the far wall. Mittens, girl number 4, was playing with a green crayon, sticking it in her mouth like a cigarette. I guess they were giving them. "It's here." Clem stumbled back, and my gaze found him once again, his eyes wide. His cry caused a commotion among the others, and realization slammed into me. They were starving again. Clem's eyes were hollow, his cheeks sunken and significantly pale. There was a certain twitch in his lips that I was trying to ignore. He had torn off the bottoms of his pants, wrapping them around his head. I had no idea how long they had been without food, but the way they moved, almost feral, backing away from the door like startled deer, gave me an idea. It looked like days. "Everyone get back!" He snarled, and to my surprise, the others slowly retracted. Clem really was a leader, glaring down the others until they stepped back. Scooby, girl number 2, squeaked in delight when the food was delivered through a slot in the door. 6 bags of steaming Five Guys. But the delivery wasn't finished. When they were all tearing into their meals, something else was slid through. I barely even noticed it myself. I was too busy watching Clem eating like an animal, stuffing fries down his throat. He was going to choke. I felt uncomfortable, my hands shaking, like I could reach through the screen and snatch his burger off him. The boy was ravenous. I didn't understand why I felt physical pain in my chest. I had only known these kids for a few hours and already I was attached to them. I snapped out of it when the second delivery hit the ground, startling the kids. It hit the sterile white floor tiles with a bang. A pickaxe. I felt the phantom legs of a spider entwine around my spine. Clem dropped his burger and stood slowly. "Don't go near it!" Girl number 1, Sabrina, shrieked. Clem didn't listen to her, and something twisted in my gut. He picked it up, the thing weighty in his hands, and then he hurled it at the wall. "Screw you!" Clem spat, his gaze flicking to camera 3. I felt a visceral reaction running through me, shuffling back on my knees, and then unexpectedly he broke into a manic grin. "We're not that crazy yet." With a mocking bow, he returned to his meal, and the others fell in stride with them. Nobody mentioned the pickaxe, and each kid seemed relatively adjusted. They played games, drawing on the walls, resorting back to children. I noticed Shitface, boy number 4, inching towards the axe, but he just laughed when Clem backed him into a corner. He shoved him back, maintaining a wide grin. "Oh, relax, Freckles, I'm joking around." The girls, however, who had formed a tight-knit group, kept their distance. When the next day came around, I think they were expecting no breakfast, and they were right. "It's okay," Clem reassured them. "We ate yesterday, we should be okay for a while." Sabrina nodded, perched in Scooby's lap. "Yeah, he's right, and they'll feed us eventually." They were wrong. 3 days passed with no food and limited water. I think they were drinking from the toilet, and fights were starting to break out. Clem was sharing what he had managed to scavenge, but I could see it in their faces. They were starting to lose their balance, growing delirious. Sometimes their wandering gazes found the pickaxe still lying on the floor. They looked away quickly, but it was clear these kids were starting to get desperate. The lights flickered off, plunging them into darkness. I could still see them through what looked like night vision, but the kids were blind. They gathered together in one corner led by Clem. "It's okay," he kept telling them, his voice shuddering. "We can get through this." Another day without food or light, the majority of them too hungry to move, and boy number 4 finally snapped. "They're not going to feed us," he announced, slowly getting to his feet, swaying off balance. He stumbled and alarm bells started ringing in my head. "Unless we use it." Clem stood, but boy number 2, Ryder, the sandy-haired kid, yanked him back down. "He's doing it on purpose, bro," Ryder muttered, his eyes half-lidded. He was the peacemaker. Dude just wants attention. To my surprise, boy number 3 and boy number 5 also got to their feet. Boy number 4 crawled over to the axe, blindly grabbing for it. "We're all hungry," he announced, smacking the blade into his hand. His eyes were crazed, almost feral, lips pulled back in a bloodthirsty grin. Shitface held up the axe. "So I propose, instead of sitting around and singing Kumbaya waiting to starve to death, we choose someone for the chop." The others screamed, immediately on their feet. The way they responded reminded me of animals in a pack. They couldn't see, but I think they could sense each other, and that was enough. With a sharp jerk of his head, Clem motioned the others behind him. Clem, Ryder, and Sabrina started forwards uncertain, in the pitch dark. But this was already a mistake, and they knew that. Scooby and Mittens dragged them back with help from Brianna. Shitface swung the axe playfully. "I'm just saying, we got actual food when we did what they wanted." He started toward the others in slow, teasing strides. "I nominate Freckles. He is our leader after all, and what leader wouldn't sacrifice himself?" The boy's lips curled into a smirk. "For the greater good, dude." The light suddenly flickered on, surprising the group. Clem's side backed away, blinking rapidly, some of them hissing, while boy number 4 stayed nonchalant, swinging the axe. They saw it as a mercy, some of the girls breaking down in relief, far off in the corner. But I saw Shitface's smile grow, his eyes widening. He saw it like invisible gods were confirming his belief. "They gave us light back," he yelled, and through that stone-cold demeanor and wild eyes, I glimpsed a scared teenage boy. He was terrified, and so he was acting out. "They want something back after what they've given us," he announced, slipping effortlessly into the leadership role. "They fed us, now they want payment." He was playing with their heads to get them to agree. He was smart, smarter than he let on. And he was hungry, I understood that. And he was scared, but resorting to murder. The boy was in front of Clem in 3 strides. Boy number 3 and number 5 following. His smile was spiteful. He had been itching to take the lead. I could tell by the way that he moved, that cocky saunter in his step. "You want us all to be okay, right?" he murmured, inclining his head mockingly. "You want everything to be sunshine and rainbows. So why not take one for the team, oh fearless leader?" He dropped to his knees, dramatizing a cry. "Please, oh leader, must you let us suffer? We are your followers after all." Clem didn't move. Sabrina stood behind him, pressing her face into his shoulder. "Ignore him," she murmured. "Just get back." Clem gently shook her away with a defeated sigh. "Okay, fine, you're right. Give me the axe." Boy number 4's expression crumpled with confusion. He lurched back, but Clem snatched the axe, twisted around, and hacked off Sabrina's head with a single brutal chop to the back of her neck. I think I tried to stop the tape, but I was frozen, watching pooling scarlet seeping across white tiles. The others erupted into screams, and Sabrina's body landed at Clem's feet. He didn't move, his fingers tightening around the wooden handle, beads of red dripping down his face and splattering his white t-shirt. Shitface staggered back, his eyes wide and mouth open. Clem, unsteady on his feet, pivoted to face the others cowering in the corner. He was eerily calm, his gaze unblinking. I think I had just watched this boy lose his humanity. His eyes were vacant, empty pools, a flicker of a triumphant smile twitching on his lips. The hollowness of his expression stood out, terrifying and void, and I wondered if I was seeing everything. The tapes had been strategically recorded. I had no doubt there was missing footage. If they don't feed us, then we'll feed them. I felt like I was going to puke. Boy number 1, Clem. I found myself moving closer to the screen until I could feel static prickling my face. He was still a kid. I didn't understand why I was crying. I couldn't stop. My hands were trembling, my heart pounding through my chest. He was 18, just graduated. I fell back when he swung the axe one more time. His gaze locked onto the camera before placing it back on the floor. Ignoring Sabrina's body, Clem turned his attention to Shitface. "Don't mess with me," he murmured, before he dragged himself to a corner, dropped to his knees, and curled into a ball. Scooby did her best to cover Sabrina's body. Mittens helped her. And Brianna sat in a corner, head buried in her knees. And breakfast came the next morning. 9 individual trays filled with croissants, cupcakes, toast, cereal, and chocolate. The others stuffed their faces, but I wasn't watching them. I was watching Clem, who instead of joining them for breakfast, was crawling towards Sabrina's body at a snail's pace. When he reached her, I expected him to say a prayer or hug her, but instead, Clem soaked his hands in her blood and shuffled over to the wall. He used her blood like paint, while the wall was his canvas, head inclined, lazily dragging his fingers, scrawling a simple smiley face. The other kids' expressions were clear on each screen. They were terrified of him. Mittens and Brianna were silently eating while Scooby and Shitface stayed away, hiding in individual corners of the room. Ryder was the only one trying to make conversation, picking at his chocolate croissant. But even his gaze was frantic, flicking back and forth between Clem and the blood-stained axe abandoned in the corner. When a loaded gun was dropped through the delivery slot in the door this time, all eyes turned to Clem, still hovering over Sabrina's body. It looked like he was trying to push her brains back inside her skull. Mittens surprised me by shuffling over to the gun and sticking it down her shirt. She nodded to the others, and to my confusion, they seemed to go along with it. Ryder dropped a plate of food in front of Clem. "Eat, dude." He pulled a face. "What are you doing?" "Didn't we get another weapon this morning?" Clem asked, sitting up with a sigh. Something acidic filled my mouth. He was smearing her blood all over his face. Ryder didn't reply, and the teenager turned to the others. "I said, did we get another weapon?" "Nope." Shitface spoke up from his corner. "No need for frontal lobotomies today, oh fearless leader." Clem slowly inclined his head and the lights flickered off once again. These kidnappers were clever. They were using the lights as a form of communication. "No." I was already choking on my words when Mittens dropped the gun with a squeak. Before I knew what I was doing, I slammed my fists into the wall. "Stop!" I shrieked, my mouth full of bile. "What was that?" Clem's voice sent my heart into my throat. On screen, his gaze was on the camera, directly at me. There was no way that he could hear me. This was pre-recorded footage from a year ago. And yet, what was what? Ryder murmured with a nervous laugh. "Can you hear something?" I threw myself into the wall, screaming. They could hear me, but that was impossible. "That!" Clem staggered to the wall, pressing his ear against its sterile white. His eyes narrowed, his lip curling. "It's a woman." With the group's attention on the cameras, I grabbed the coffee cup, hurling it against the wall. "Hello?" I yelled. "It's okay, I'm gonna get you out of there." The tape stopped with 9 pairs of eyes trained on camera 4. I felt myself hit the ground, my head spinning. There was no way that they could hear me. No way. I slid back over to the tapes, kneeling in freezing cold coffee. Feeling suffocated, I shoved the May 24 tape into the player. Blank. The screen was white. It was playing, but there was no footage. Panic started to slither down my spine, contorting in my gut. I ejected the tape and slid in June 24. Blank. The screen this time was bright blue, reflecting in my face. By now, I was scrambling and grabbing July 24. They were all blank of footage, empty. I went through August and September. I think at this point it was starting to hit me. Was April 24 alive? I left the screens, this time pounding on the door. "Hello," I cried, punching the wall until my fists were bleeding. "Can anyone hear me?" When my lights went out, the screens flashed from bright blue to a single still image. Clem. His face was projected on all 4 screens, his wide, grinning mouth, his hollow eyes. Behind him, the walls had been smeared scarlet, entrails dripping from the ceiling. I could see bodies behind him, but I couldn't make them out. He inclined his head slowly, a mockery of a bow, as blood seeped down his chin, stringy, red tangled in his hair. And atop his head sat a crown of something, stark and jagged and glittering in the dim white light. I tried 6 months worth of tapes all the way to March 25, but every single one of them was just Clem grinning at the camera. Sometimes he would paw at it like an animal, fleshy red clinging to his teeth. And December 24 was more lively. He skipped around the room, slipping in blood, giggling for almost 6 hours straight before going back to the camera, back to me. When I had ejected the last tape, the door clicked open. I reached for the tapes, but a voice startled me. "Leave them, Mary." I did, slowly walking out of the room. I was on a long white corridor and drinking in each door. Those kids could have been behind one of them. Before I could check them out, a fire door was opened, and I was ushered outside where a car was waiting. I got inside with no question, and the car drove me home. Home. I suddenly recognized my hometown, the high school, the kindergarten, the soccer field. When the car stopped at the end of my road, I almost toppled out, my memories slamming into me like waves of ice water. I ran home to my husband, who was standing on the doorstep, his lips pursed. He was pale, his hands full of paper. "Harry." He hugged me, wrapping his arms around me. "You didn't find him," he whispered into my shoulder. I pulled away, my throat on fire. "Him?" I jumped when a golden retriever jumped up at me. "Clem." I ruffled his head, tears stinging my eyes. He was such a good boy. Harry led me back inside our house into our kitchen filled with cookies and cupcakes with "Have you seen this boy?" perfectly written with blue icing, and littering our house posters with a familiar face. I snatched one up and immediately puked. Zach. The smiling boy on the cupcakes and cookies, on the missing posters. I knew how to look for bumps and scrapes because I was used to them. I was used to checking for concussions when my baby was knocked over on the football field. I wasn't in the medical field, I wasn't a doctor. I was a mom. I didn't know that I was screaming until Harry wrapped me into a hug. "Honey, what's wrong?" He kept saying, but I was numb. I climbed the stairs with shaky legs and stumbled into my son's room, Zach. Memories swamped me. dragging me to all fours. I remembered his 10th birthday party, his mouth full of frosting. Look, Mommy. His voice is in my head. I can still see his face. Zach, my sweet boy. How did I forget him? How did they make me forget him? Boy number 1, Clem, the emotionless killer who had murdered a room full of teenagers. My son. Please help me. I need help. I found my son, but I lost him again. I don't even know if he's there anymore. I can't breathe. I know it sounds crazy, but on the April tape, those kids could hear me. My son could hear me. But how is that possible? My baby is out there. Whatever state he's in, I need to find him.